Robert Edward Keenan killed himself in the fall of 1999. I wasn't there, but it's where my story begins. It begins with Rob, 17 years old, sitting in a burning car in the middle of a crowded parking lot one Monday night in October. He burned for nearly 4 hours before the police let the firemen near enough to put out the flames and put out his body. I didn't know him. Not really. We lived in a small town. I knew him by sight and knew his name. I doubt we'd ever exchange more than a few perfunctory words. It makes me feel funny talking about him. Like I'm not justified doing it, but I'm going to tell you about the Spire. It's unavoidable. I have to tell you about Robert Edward Keenan and how the suicide note he left behind tangled up my life with his. Back then, we both lived in a sleepy town in New England, a little over an hour northwest of Boston, just across the New Hampshire border. The sort of place that's nice to live, if you're the sort of person that doesn't like doing very much. There's really only 3 reasons anyone stepped foot in my hometown. The first is that they're on their way over to Nashua, the shopping mecca of the Northeast. The second would be the ice cream. We have a dairy farm where they sell the world's best ice cream, all of it made right there on the premises. And the third is because they bought one of those haunted New England books. So usually you can find our town listed in those books twice. The first entry will likely be the story of how our high school is one of the 10 oldest in the country, came to have the Silver Spectre as its mascot, and I always loved the Spectre. It reflected how steeped in folklore rural New England once was, and as mascots go, it's much more interesting than the fighting fill-in-the-cat species here, and everyone else seems to have saddled with. Way back in the 1890s, there was a terrible blizzard. A proper nor'easter. It dumped several feet of snow across the whole region. There were many, many casualties, mostly the very young and very old, stuck in their homes without heat. One of the exceptions was neither very young nor very old. It was Jennifer Wilkins. She was a teacher trapped in the school when the blizzard hit. What little food there was in the schoolhouse couldn't have lasted more than 2 days. And folks say by the 5th, she had resorted to boiling her boots to soften up the leather for eating. It was 2 weeks before anyone was able to reach her. They found her body, thin as a matchstick, wrapped up in a gray wool blanket. If only they'd had paste in those days, she might have made it. That old schoolhouse is now our town rec center. Supposedly, old Jenny still haunts its halls, wrapped in that gray wool blanket. Her hollow, emaciated visage, searching in vain for something to eat. Once when I was 8 or 9 years old, long before I knew the origins of the Silver Spectre, I went up into the rec center's attic alone. It was August. I had snuck away from the rest of the summer reading program in my own interminable boredom. The dusty attic was filled with broken furniture and plastic bins containing the crafting supplies for all the daycare programs. Would have been entirely forgettable if not for the drafts. The summer had been hot and humid, but in the rec center's attic, if you stepped in the wrong spot, it'd get so cold that you could practically see your breath. I told my mom about it. She was the one who told me about Jenny. Never went back there alone. The second story you typically find in those books is about the Blood Cemetery. Its real name is the Pine Hill Cemetery, but nobody calls it that. They call it the Blood Cemetery, because it's supposedly haunted by Abel Blood and his family. According to legend, Abel Blood lived in the center of what is now the cemetery back when it was farmland. He returned from the fields early one day to find his wife in bed with another man, a tall, dark-haired stranger. Abel was stunned. How could Mrs. Blood, a good Christian woman, do such a thing? Obviously, the scoundrel was forcing himself on his wife. Abel retrieved his pitchfork and charged back into the house, his mind full of vengeance. But as he drew near, he heard his wife, mid-coitus, proclaim her love for the black-haired stranger. And with a note of satisfaction to recall that Abel had never heard before. Mr. Blood saw red. He burst into the room, pitchfork aloft, and ran them through. Over and over, he plunged the fork into their tangled bodies before finally leaving them pinned, one on top of the other, to the bed beneath them. Looking back at the bloody mess he'd made, Abel found his rage had not diminished. This seemed curious to Abel, but it dawned on him why when he spied a picture of his family on the mantel. whose children didn't look anything like him, nor like their mother. They were all exceptionally tall, with full heads of somewhat greasy black hair. Abel waited, standing in the puddle of blood that had only moments ago been coursing through Mrs. Blood and her lover, and stewed in his ever-deepening anger. He was a cuckold. He had no heir. He had been raising another man's child, a man who had been bedding Abel's wife for years. Abel waited and stewed for several hours until his 4 children arrived home from school. They say his sons and eldest daughter put up a noble fight, but they were children fighting a grown man whose muscles had been hardened by a lifetime of farm labor. Only Abel's youngest daughter, barely 5 years old, made it out of the house alive. She sprinted as fast as her little legs could carry her in a desperate attempt to reach her neighbors. But even with her head start, her little legs were no match for the father's powerful strides. Just as she scrambled over the stone wall separating their farm from the Hollises, Abel picked up one of the stones and smashed it down on her head. These days, if you go there, on the road that borders the cemetery, you'll see this curve, full of skid marks. People say that they're caused by cars swerving to avoid an oddly dressed little girl who runs out into the street each night. Back home, we had a rite of passage. As soon as you or one of your friends were old enough to drive, you had to trespass into the blood cemetery at night and make a rubbing of the family's gravestones. I did it. And you should feel free to, but be prepared to be disappointed because none of the Bloods died on the same date. See, a lot of the ghost stories are like that, right? It doesn't mean they're not fun, but you come to realize as you get older is that they're mostly a form of social control. Jennifer Wilkins really did die a horrible death, but the story of Abel Blood is nothing but a fantasy story with a rather dark, misogynistic message. Cheat on your husband and he'll kill you. I loved ghost stories growing up. I loved them. It gave me my not entirely unearned reputation as the spooky kid. There's a reason that about a month after he died, Rob Keenan's suicide note wound up in my lap. There, buried in the middle of apologies to his family and clear evidence of severe depression, was my first push towards the spire in the woods. The only ghost story I truly believe. In 1999, I was a sophomore in high school. Rob was a senior. He wasn't what you call real popular. Part of it was that he wasn't born in my hometown, but moved there in the 7th grade, right when kids are at their cruelest. The first time I ever heard of him was a year later. There was a rumor floating around that he and a mentally handicapped girl were found naked in the woods together, the implication being that he tricked her into having sex with him. Now, a couple of years later, I heard another, that his parents were forced to move because Rob had been molested by their old priest down in Amherst. Out of the best of my knowledge, these stories were entirely untrue, and I'm deeply ashamed to admit that when I was in the 6th grade, I did gleefully repeat the first one. See, I found it funny at the time, right? The second one I also repeated, just not as gleefully. I whispered it to my friends, adopting a sage tone, offering it as an explanation for why the first rumor was probably true. Felt so goddamn smart. Had the inside scoop, something interesting to say, and everyone wanted to listen to me. Wish I'd kept my mouth shut. I wasn't smart. I was just kicking a kid while he was down, spreading lies that may have contributed to him killing himself. The rumors followed Rob everywhere. He was a quiet kid, by all accounts very bright and kind, and I want to be clear here, he did have people who cared about him, friends. Not many, and maybe they weren't too popular either, but they were there, and they were nice guys. One of them was my ride to school, Nathan Fletcher. Fletcher and I lived in the same neighborhood. We were never all that close, but we got along well enough. He was a lovable goofball, always saying the wrong thing at the wrong time, but it never got him down. He had this grin that stretched from ear to ear, and he always managed to get me excited about his latest musical discovery or restoration project. Fletch used to buy old cars, fix them up, resell them. While it helped pad his savings for college, it also meant that he was stuck driving whatever hunk of junk he hadn't managed to fix up enough to sell yet. That year, Fletch was driving a 1984 Honda Civic. I still hate that car. Found out something was wrong on Tuesday morning when Fletch's rust bucket didn't show up in my driveway, like it usually did. Instead, his dad, an Air Force officer, nowhere near as affable as his son, was waiting for me. I liked Mr. Fletcher fine. He was a good, if not particularly affectionate father to his boys and respectful neighbor, but his presence in my driveway was odd, especially since I could see that Fletch wasn't in the car. Sir, is everything okay with Nate? Yeah, he's fine. We're just giving him the day off school. Come on, grab your bag. I'll explain on the way. Mr. Fletch had turned around and started back toward his car before he even finished speaking. I grabbed my backpack and I hustled after him. You know the Keenan boy? He asked as we pulled out of my driveway. Not really. I mean, I know who he is. One of Nate's friends. Mr. Fletcher nodded, never taking his eyes off the road. He killed himself last night. He said it as evenly as if he'd been announcing we needed to stop for gas. He what? My brain couldn't even process what I was hearing. I'd seen Rob Keenan in the hallway yesterday. How could he be dead? Mr. Fletcher proceeded to lay out the cold, dry facts. Rob had hand-delivered a letter to the house around 7 p.m. Fletch wasn't home when Rob dropped it off, so he didn't open it until later that night, at 9:45 or so. Upon reading the letter, Fletch went white as a ghost and tore out of the house without permission. He raced to, I'm going to omit this detail just so you don't know its location, that Rob had killed himself, but when he arrived, the car was already burning. Apparently the letter was a suicide note. Nathan's too upset for school. Something in how he said it made it seem like Mr. Fletcher was implying there was something unmanly about his 17-year-old son being too upset to sit through pre-calculus after one of his best friends had killed himself. He should have called you, Mr. Fletcher continued, but he didn't think to, and it didn't occur to me until it was too late for you to catch the bus. Sorry about that. My initial shock gave way to resentment. No one could have made Rob Keenan's suicide pleasant news, but it was difficult to imagine anyone being more callous than Mr. Fletcher. No wonder Fletch complained about his father so much. Yeah, no, don't worry about it, I mumbled. We rode the rest of the way in silence. I got to school and found it changed compared to the day before. It was an alien landscape. It reminded me of Tartarus and Greek mythology, a bunch of people milling about, a vacant and lost look in their eyes, unsure of what to do, what to say to one another. Friends clustered silently in small groups. It was like Rob's funeral was being held in the hallways. Classes weren't canceled, but nothing was done. Mainly the teachers made us aware of special counseling being offered for anyone closely affected, and told us that we could come into them if we ever needed to. Their nerves were also frayed. I recall specifically my study hall teacher, normally a very soft-spoken man, banging his head on his desk and swearing that it was completely fucking unnecessary, adding a moment later that no one needs to do that, no one. We all of us drifted through the day in a haze. You'd hug your friends, you'd ask them how they were holding up, or how well they knew Rob. You'd hear about who was there that night at the omitted location that was a popular teen hangout, and you heard about the cops that could have saved him, but didn't. I mentioned earlier that Rob Keenan was left in his burning car for 4 hours. That's not an exaggeration. It was 4 hours. Later reports say less time had passed, but Fletch was there, screaming himself hoarse, screaming at the cops and firemen and anyone who would listen that was his friend in there, and he was dying. It was 4 hours. Being teenagers, we were quick to question the actions of the police, but I now believe that while their delay proved to be without merit, they made the best decision they could have with the information available to them. Rob hadn't lit himself on fire to be dramatic. He didn't intend for there to be a fire at all. Rob had wanted to shoot himself. Back then, in the 90s, in the pre-9/11 world, terrorism wasn't part of the zeitgeist. I mean, it was bad, absolutely terrible, and we knew it. We'd had Timothy McVeigh and his failed bombing of the Twin Towers, but we We hadn't entered into that neo-McCarthyism that marked much of the early 2000s, where the mere whisper of the word could get you thrown off of an airplane or placed in an FBI watch list. And there was a certain cliché, a mystique, that came with the equipment and ideas surrounding terrorism carried in the imaginations of adolescent boys. Which is probably why Rob Keenan, like virtually every other guy I knew growing up, had copies of the Anarchist Cookbook and the Terrorist Handbook, saved to a 3.5-inch floppy that he had stashed in his room. When he failed to get a gun, he built one. I'm a little wary to Google it, but if my memory serves, the instruction for it are listed in one of those text files as the Homebrew Blast Cannon. Rob's blast cannon consisted of a little more than a lead pipe capped on one end and filled with gunpowder and bits of metal. I mean, it did the trick, but it also launched burning gunpowder all over the interior of his car. Some of the people at the scene thought they had seen someone else in the car with Rob, a girl, and relayed this information to Officer McCullough, who was the first emergency responder to arrive. Officer McCullough hadn't seen anyone else in the car. All he saw was a burning car, a crowd of teenagers who all reported having heard an explosion, and the lead pipe that had rolled out of Rob's unconscious hand and onto the passenger side of the floor. Terrorism may not have been a big part of the zeitgeist at the time, but school shootings were. Columbine massacre had happened only 6 months prior, and Officer McCullough was looking at a fairly typical teen loner. Reports of an explosion on what was, but very well could have been, an undetonated pipe bomb still in the burning car. He made a tough call. It may have cost Rob Keenan his life, but then again, he might have already been dead. And you have to ask yourself about what that officer did. Was it worth risking more lives to find out? I remember thinking that Officer McCullough at that point was only known to me as the cop who always gave kids a hard time for riding their bikes without a helmet. And maybe he was a bastard. But if he was, it wasn't because of this. He couldn't risk more lives. Besides, whether or not it was suicide, if there had been a second person in the car, where the hell was she? Nobody who knew Robert Edward Keenan at all, and even people like me who barely knew him, believed for a second that he was out to kill a whole bunch of people. But there was something else he could have been going on. Rob had a crush on a girl that bordered on obsession. It lasted years and only seemed to be getting worse. The girl in question, Alina, Rob would go out of his way to stand in her line or linger at the parking lot after hours, hoping to speak with her as she was heading home. Everyone immediately wondered if that mystery girl in the fire had been Alina. Did he pull her into his car to once more profess his love for her and, unable to handle another rejection, take his own life before her eyes? Or, God forbid, try to take Alina's with him? Alina's friends and co-workers shouted her name. "Alina! Alina, where are you?" When she didn't respond, they fanned out to look for her. It was the manager, Mrs. Jaffrey, who found her. Completely overwhelmed by Rob's suicide, Alina had retreated into one of the walk-in freezers. She was bawling her eyes out as Mrs. Jaffrey threw her coat over Alina's shoulders and led her to the manager's office. "It's not your fault," the older woman whispered into Alina's ear. But it didn't do any good. No one else was accountable for her. And no mystery woman was ever found. No second bomb ever exploded. No accomplices ever turned up. I guess we all assumed that those eyewitnesses were mistaken, that the smoke and the flames had played a trick on their eyes. We were wrong. Fletch wasn't in school for the rest of the week, and I didn't see him around the neighborhood either. I hate to admit it, but it sort of was a relief. I had no idea what I was going to say to him. What do you really say to someone whose friend had just killed himself? In the weeks that followed, a new form of gossip slowly crept into the hallways of the school. The special counseling held in the cafeteria every morning before homeroom was supposed to be a safe place, where anyone could share their feelings about fear or of judgment and be secure in the knowledge that it would go no further. So naturally, it was all anyone wanted to talk about. There was a strong backlash against the kids the other students didn't feel deserved to be there, people who presented themselves as having been very close to Rob, but who in truth rarely spoke with him. Several of my close friends had been there that night. They had watched Rob burn, seen him die, And although they were deeply affected, they weren't even entirely comfortable being there amongst his handful of close friends, and of course, Alina. I felt terrible for Alina Amenev, sitting there in the cafeteria surrounded by Rob's grieving friends, listening to everyone tiptoe around blaming her. They never came out and said it, but they talked about how girls wouldn't give him the time of day, how someone had recently ripped out his heart, and when the counselor spoke about how challenging it can be to cope with the insensitivity of other teens, many of the room cast sidelong glances in her direction, waiting for her reaction before adding in their own 2 cents. The year before Rob's death, Alina had suddenly found herself with a kind of unexpected popularity. She was born in Russia, but her parents had managed to immigrate to the United States when Alina was still an infant, which was during the tail end of the Cold War. It was not an easy feat. Kids used to tease her about her family being Soviet spies. When she started coming into her own, teasing turned into flirting. She never quite reached the ranks of our school's alpha females, but her je ne sais quoi was undeniable. Alina was pretty, sure, but not unattainably so. She was smart, but not so much so that it was intimidating. She had fair skin and wild hair. Her eyes would sparkle whenever she said something clever, and she had this smirk that spread like a wave from left to right across her lips. Most alluring of all, Alina had this attitude, this way of carrying herself. It was like she was sure wherever she was the place to be. It was infectious. In short, Alina Amenev was exactly the kind of girl that an unpopular guy could fool himself into thinking he had a chance with. God knows, I did when I found myself suddenly talking to her in late November of 1999. Alina had grown quieter in the weeks that followed Rob's death. Even as the rest of the school began to show signs of moving on, she continued to retreat. She quit her job, and though I don't quite remember when the season started and stopped, either quit or never signed up for cross-country that year. She just sort of shut herself off from the world and everyone in it, which was why I was so surprised to see her at Drew DeLuca's birthday party. She was nervous. This used to be her element, and no one at Drew's that night was indicated to blame her for Rob's death. This was not his circle of friends, this was hers. But whenever she approached someone or tried to join in on a conversation, she looked like a gazelle approaching a watering hole. I wasn't sure if it was safe. And when she was in the conversation, she mainly shifted her weight from foot to foot or fidgeted with some part of her outfit, never really engaging anyone unless they addressed her directly. I was telling a friend of mine about a recent trip I had taken to Greenfield with Scary Carrie, the only one that I could drag along on a ghost hunting trip, when I felt a gentle tug on the back of my shirt. I turned around having to see DeLuca's kid sister, but it was Alina. "Can we talk?" "Oh, yeah, sure." "Outside?" She looked over my shoulder at my friends before adding, "Alone?" If it had been spring, I would have been thrilled by the prospect of Alina Amenev pulling me out of the party to talk alone. But it wasn't spring. It was New Hampshire, in late November. We stood on the back deck, our jackets pulled tightly around us, our breath hanging in the air, plain to see. She said she heard from Christy McDowell that I knew a lot about ghost stories. Christy was quite possibly my oldest friend in the world, and yes, it was true. I knew a lot about ghost stories. I was raised Catholic and blessed with kind, warm-hearted parents who I was always eager to please. This meant that I took my Catholicism and my schoolwork very seriously, which eventually led to a struggle between my rational and spiritual beliefs that was only exacerbated by my growing awareness that the sexual abuse scandal and the church's subsequent cover-up. I had hated losing my faith. I wanted desperately to believe as I had a child. So when most teenagers had shut the book on ghost stories, relegating them to little more than childhood memories or an excuse to scare a girl you wanted to put your arm around, I doubled down. I thought if I could find some shred of evidence in support of the supernatural, that would keep the door to the spiritual world open for me. Even if only for a time. Of course, I didn't share all that with Alina. Instead, I tried to act casual. Casual, bordering on slightly disinterested. Yeah, well, kinda. I think she could see through me. Why? Alina began fishing around inside her jacket. You have to swear to me that you'll never tell anyone I showed you this. I swore. Alina pulled her hand from her coat, her dainty fingers clutching an envelope like it was a particularly delicate piece of glass. She handed me Rob's suicide note. Opening the envelope and unfolding the pages felt like a profound invasion of privacy, but who could resist reading it when it was handed to you? What were Rob Keenan's last words to the girl he'd been obsessed with for years, the girl many of his peers believed was the reason he killed himself? 13 years have passed, leaving me with little more than an impression of what the note said. But even if I remembered it exactly, I think this would be where I draw the line. What I'd say is, it was very earnest. Rob had been depressed for a long time. He felt horrible about leaving his family and his friends to deal with the aftermath of his suicide, but he also felt isolated, and in a very profound way, and more than anything, he just wanted it to stop. I also don't mind sharing that he was very effusive in his praises for Alina, but I got the distinct impression that he didn't know her as well as he thought. He wrote about her in 3 florid terms full of superlatives. Once he said that he didn't think he could live without her, but ultimately nothing he said was very specific. Everyone thinks that the first love of their life is the most special, the most attractive person in the world, and that no one could appreciate them as deeply as they do. I felt for him, I really did. But reading it, I didn't feel as though I'd gotten to know him any better. Not really. As I finished reading, I looked up and I met Alina's gaze. She was looking at me expectantly, but I wasn't making the connection. Okay, what does this have to do with ghost stories? I asked. Alina pointed to the bottom of one of the paragraphs, expounding on why Rob wanted to take his own life. It read, "And every hour I see her face, as she runs the endless race." Her face. I had assumed that he was talking about Alina and her years of running track and cross-country, but if that was the case, why would he write her and not your in a letter that was to Alina? A shiver ran up my spine. It wasn't cold, it was more like someone had walked over my grave. "The endless race," I said. Yes! For a split second, Alina was her former self again. God, I was starting to think I'd imagined it. Tell me, you remember where it's from? I mumbled the line, "And every hour I see her face as she runs the endless race." A couple of times under my breath, I knew that I'd heard it before, but where? I was positive it was a ghost story, but I hadn't... Oh, I'd read literally hundreds, if not thousands of them, and they had a tendency to bleed together. No. Shit! Alina banged her fist against the railing of the deck. But it was a ghost story, right? Yeah, I know it. I just can't... I trailed off, racking my brain. Alina started drifting back towards Drew's house. Well, if you think of it, I cut her off. Absolutely! So much for slightly disinterested. As she reached the door, she turned around and looked at me. She stared at me for a long time, longer than any pause in a conversation should be. I think he mentioned it in the one he wrote to Nate Fletcher, too. I stared back at Alina. Fletcher's letter? Yeah. Did you find it? That's a line I didn't think I could cross. Yeah. A few days after Rob's suicide, a handful of young reporters showed up at the school, trawling for quotes. Before the faculty could chase them out, they pushed hard for someone, anyone, to give support to the lone wolf school shooter angle. Rob's real friends flatly refused to speak to the reporters, but there's a certain element among young people who only want attention, and the same kids who showed up for the grief counseling, despite never having been particularly close to Rob, were the first in line to provide quotes. The next day, the local paper was filled with statements like, "No one really knew him," says student Melissa Bennett. For Fletch, it was a slap in the face. What? Because she didn't know him, nobody could? But a week or so after Rob died, Fletch resumed picking me up in the morning. "I don't count? Murph doesn't count? Fucking bullshit!" Listening to him rant about the story in the paper made me think that maybe I should have spoken to the reporters. I wouldn't have pretended to have some kind of special insight into Rob's mental state, but it might have been nice for his friends and family to have seen something simple and honest. Something that didn't fit the lone wolf narrative. Even if it was nothing more than saying, he had friends. They're just not talking to you because they're grieving, you heartless parasite. I wish I'd done that. But I didn't. I also wish I could tell you that I wrote something the following week roasting the reporters for coming into a school and pushing students still reeling from the shock of losing a classmate into spouting a bunch of pop psycho pseudo-scientific nonsense, but that wasn't me either. That was some senior I didn't know very well. Now, I made a few tenuous attempts at getting Fletch to open up about Rob. The best I had managed was to get him ranting about the kids in the grieving council session that didn't belong. Talking about them got the normally placid Fletch so angry, I thought he might have an aneurysm. After that, I quickly gave up. Once I resolved to not pry into Fletch's life, our morning rides settled into something almost comfortable. Our casual friendship was like a knee recovering from an injury. Fine so long as we didn't put any weight on it. And that was still the state of things the day that we returned to school after Drew DeLuca's birthday. Today, tracking down the story that led me to the Spire would have been a piece of cake. For me, anyway. For you, I've changed too many details. I could have typed this little rhyming snippet of Rob's suicide note into Google and had my answer in seconds, but the internet wasn't as robust back then. Hell, I'm pretty sure in 1999 I was still using Hotbot. Nonetheless, from the second I returned from Drew's until school started on Monday, I spent every waking minute scouring every haunted places book and paranormal website I could find, looking for the phrase, "In every hour I see her face as she runs the endless race," or some variation. By the end of the weekend, half the contents of the bookshelf had been redistributed throughout the house, and I had skimmed countless GeoCities pages, scrolling past Dancing Ghost GIFs and Dancing Ghost GIF until my eyes bled, but still, I had nothing to show for it. I knew I couldn't bring it up with Fletch. Not directly at any rate. Rob's death was still a raw nerve, so I went to the only person who knew even more about ghost stories than I did. Scary Carrie. Growing up in the woods of New Hampshire at the foot of White Mountains wasn't all that bad. My school had a hiking club that also taught us elementary wilderness and survival skills. It was immensely popular, mainly because it culminated into a week-long hike, which meant you got to miss a week of school. As freshmen, my friends and I all signed up to go together that fall, but 2 weeks before the big event, I came down with a case of antibiotic-resistant strep throat, and I had to have my tonsils removed. Fun. Since the program was extremely popular, each student could only partake once. Even though I was allowed to make up my hike the following winter, it was still a bit of a letdown since none of my friends could come with me. I was intensely jealous when my friends returned from the hike closer than ever with a slew of inside jokes and stories from their week in the woods. But by the time I left for my hike a few months later, things in my circle of friends had already returned to normal. I was mainly just concerned about being stuck in the woods with random classmates I had little in common with. If you spent all day hiking with a large frame pack, you may not appreciate how grueling it can be. It's a high washout rate of kids who get sick or throw in the towel and have to be picked up and taken home. There's an even higher rate of kids who never shut up about how much their feet hurt, and by the time that we stopped for lunch on the first day, any concerns I had of loneliness were replaced by my seething hatred for that group of kids. Those of us capable of keeping our mouths shut, at least about our feet, quickly bonded. That's how I became friends with Scary Carrie Peterson, the last person on Earth I'd ever imagine I'd become close to. Carrie was one of those unlucky people that seemed scientifically designed to be picked on. She was nearly 6 feet tall, quite overweight, crap at school, poor by the standards of my admittedly affluent town, and cursed, with a head the size of a large pumpkin. I'd had classes with Carrie on and off for the last 9 years, and before the hike, I doubt I'd spoken more than 2 words to her. Although, in fairness to me, in middle school she had deepened her own isolation from most of the class by becoming intensely goth on the baby bat way of the late 90s teens. There was a blonde girl on the hike. I think her name was Stephanie Foster, that 2 hours later I had found very cute, and despite her whining, I was still thinking I might like to get to know her a little bit better before she let this gem slip. God, I just wanted to miss school. Why do we have to walk so much? I rolled my eyes. I didn't say anything. Carrie, however, could not let it slide. What the hell do you think this hike was? Stephanie looked at her like Carrie was something she'd scraped off the bottom of her boots. Nobody's talking to you. And nobody wants to fucking listen to you. I couldn't help it. I laughed. I still didn't think of Scary Carrie as a friend yet, but it was suddenly a lot harder not to like her. After lunch, our line of hikers silently and seemingly unconsciously rearranged our marching order, with the whiners taking up the rear, and those of us who could keep our aches and pains to ourselves leading the pack. By dinner time, Stephanie and the 3 other girls from her clique, perhaps unimpressed by the franks and beans we were having, decided to throw in the towel. It gets dark early in the winter. Dark and cold. On the fall hike after dinner, my friends were able to wander around the campsite quite a bit, but for us, there was only one thing to do. Sit close to the fire. And that's where Carrie and I really bonded. Someone half-jokingly asked if anyone knew any good ghost stories. Well, there was the usual student reluctance to step up and put yourself out there to be judged, and our chaperones weren't terribly interested in anything but double-checking our work setting up the tents. But after a few false starts from other kids, I decided to tell an old standby. The story of an old woman that lived in Maine, who had been caught abducting pets and small children. It was said that she was a witch who ate the flesh of her victims and turned their bones into china. The second I finished, Carrie started telling one of hers. We took turns telling stories the rest of the night and continued telling stories every night after for the rest of the week. Between campsites, we walked next to each other, chatting about the kind of crap that seemed important to teenagers and quizzing each other on local paranormal hotspots. Now, back at school, after the hike, maintaining my friendship with Carrie proved to be tricky. My friends never really understood the bond. They weren't mean to her, not exactly, but despite my efforts to bring her into the fold, they never embraced her. As for the few friends Carrie had, some couldn't mask their disdain for my taste in music and clothing, while others were the sort of kids that were desperate and clingy. 2 things I always found to be hard to stomach. But Carrie was one of the only people I could talk to about losing my faith. She was always game to get together and go on one of my very fruitless ghost hunts. So we stayed in regular contact. The Monday after my conversation with Alina, I tracked down Scary Carrie in the cafeteria, sitting with a few other goth kids. We'd talked a lot after Rob killed himself. In part because I knew that Carrie, from time to time, had suicidal thoughts of her own. Now, it must have been the height of stupidity, but until Rob Keenan actually ended his own life, I never thought that it could happen in my town. At least not to anyone I knew. After Rob had done it, though, I knew I couldn't let Carrie slip down that same path, and for a while, I doubled my efforts to spend time with her. But after one particularly awkward night ghost hunting in Greenfield, well, we had fallen back into status quo. Carrie, you mind if I steal you for a second? I asked, pointing back out into the hallway behind me. As Carrie rose to leave, Kim Murray leaned over to one of their other friends and said, "Aww." But she just seemed something cute. Carrie's face splotched with scarlet and shot Kim a look of pure hatred. Forget it, come on, I said. I didn't know what Carrie had told Kim about Greenfield, but she didn't want to deal with it. Once we were in the hallway and out of everyone's earshot, I recounted the events of Drew DeLuca's party. She let you read the note that he left her? Even though, just a month ago, we'd spent several hours being lectured by our guidance counselor about the differences between depression, the true depression that was a psychological illness, and being sad, I think Carrie still had trouble believing anyone was more miserable than she was. Carrie stepped closer to me and dropped her voice to a whisper. Why'd he do it? Was it her fault? I trusted Carrie, but I was reluctant to share too much with her. I hate to admit it, but in spite of having counted Carrie amongst my friends for the past year, Alina's pretty face had flipped my loyalties completely to her on one conversation. I got to the chase. Rob wrote something in Alina's note. I swear it was from a ghost story, but I can't remember which one. What did it say? And every hour, I see her face as she runs the endless race. Scary Carrie shivered. The Widower's Clock. I hate that one. While my story begins with Rob Keenan killing himself, the story of the Spire in the Woods begins almost a century earlier in the former town of Enfield, Massachusetts, a few years before it was destroyed. In the late 1920s, an elderly clockmaker from Boston married a beautiful young girl, and the two of them settled in Enfield. He was a master craftsman, the finest in the world, able to create machines of such complexity and precision that he was often called the Da Vinci of clockworks. No small feat, considering Da Vinci himself had designed clockwork automations. She was a great beauty. Refined and cultivated before meeting the clockmaker, she had been celebrated by the Boston Brahmin for her wit and for throwing the very best dinner parties. The clockmaker had amassed a great fortune, but he, like all great artists, was unsatisfied by all the products of his lifetime of labor. He wanted to build one more clock, a clock that would surpass even Munich's Rothus Glockenspiel in its artistry and complexity. He completed his plans in the spring of 1931. They were beautiful. His designs were classic, yet modern, complex, yet clean. Each hour, when the bells called out the time, the automations would dance forth from their hidden chambers and symbolically reenact different battles of the Civil War, each day telling the story of how the North came to vanquish the South. Lowell and Boston both desperately wanted the clock tower, as did a few other larger manufacturing and shipping companies, but before construction could begin on any town hall, courthouse, or corporate headquarters, the Depression hit. All the suitors disappeared in short order, one after one, leaving the clockmaker alone with his plans. Miserable and depressed, the clockmaker feared he would die before he had the chance to see his vision complete. He resolved that he wouldn't let it happen and began spending his considerable fortune building the tower on his own, as an addition to his house in Enfield. One day, the clock tower nearly complete, the clockmaker returned home from picking up a custom-made part. He arrived much earlier than anticipated to discover his wife in bed with another man, one of his laborers. The clockmaker burst into the room and screamed at his wife and her lover. He had never been so angry or humiliated in all of his life, but he didn't yet know what humiliation was. Rather than begging his forgiveness or cower before him, or even flee the room in shame, the clockmaker's wife and her lover laughed at him. They told the clockmaker that he was an impotent old man. They were unafraid of him. "Run along back to your little gears and springs," his wife said. "Maybe if you're nice and quiet, I'll fix you your dinner tonight." The clockmaker, in a state of shock, slunk back to his gears and springs, but rather than going to work on the clock, he went to work on a plan. He removed the automations from their posts, and he set all of his meager strength to coiling the huge spring that ran beneath their tracks. He laid out his tools so they would be near at hand, and then he waited, listening to the rhythms of his marriage bed, slamming again and again against the wall. Eventually, the rhythmic thuds reached their crescendo and then fell quiet, and soon after he heard his wife calling out to him, but he said nothing. Her calls grew urgent, and repentance crept into her voice. Would she really be concerned for him, after what she said? Still, the clockmaker stayed silent. When the laborer entered the room, which was little more than a giant gearbox, the clockmaker stared at him, but did not move. The laborer leaned back out of the room and called to his lover, "He's in here!" "He hasn't done anything stupid, has he?" "No, he's fine." The clockmaker was not fine. The laborer approached the clockmaker as cautiously as a man approaches an unfamiliar dog. "It's your fault, you know." The clockmaker, his watery eyes unblinking, only responding by staring at the younger man approaching him. "Fine lady like that, Fancy. You can't keep her in a cage, especially around here in this dreadful place, and expect she won't get bored." It was at that exact moment that the laborer stepped across the path of the automaton's track, and the clockmaker yanked out the pin holding the spring coiled. The post, unburdened by a man-sized figure, brimmed with heavy metal gears, racing along the track and collided with the soft flesh of the laborer's leg. The crack of the bone splintering was even louder than the man's screams. The clockmaker's wife called out at the sound of her lover's cries, "I'm coming!" The clockmaker picked up a large wrench and moved beside the door. As his wife rushed in, her eyes searching for her lover, the clockmaker crept up behind her and brought the wrench down on her skull. She awoke several hours later, with shooting pains running through her legs. She tried to look down, but her head was in agony to move. The clockmaker stood over her, his mallet hammering the metal support rods into her thighs. Her lover was already mounted to the post, ready to fill in for the automaton and dance when the hour struck. Just as with the Rathis Glockenspiel in Munich, the clockmaker's creation was hailed as a great artistic achievement. The crowds gathered on the formerly quiet street to watch the myriad Union and Rebel automatons zip across their tracks, round and round in an endless race. It was weeks before anyone noticed something wrong with two of the automaton. Their lacquered veneer bulged in weird places and looked slick, as if it were wet. Then one day, the finish gave way and the crowd, which was mostly children at this point, watched in horror as two corpses zipped along the track, chasing and stabbing at each other with bayonets. They say that even after the clock was stopped and the lovers were laid to rest, all those who saw the wife's face were haunted by visions of her endlessly running across their track. I didn't have to ask why Scary Carrie hated the story of the widower's clock. She was the one who pointed out to me how ghost stories were frequently used as a form of social control. Here was another story where an unfaithful woman was put to death by an angry husband, and crueler still, children were also punished. Children whose only crime was having seen the corpse of the unfaithful woman, a corpse that enraged husband put on display. I couldn't wait to tell Alina. I didn't have any classes with her, but we had lunch the same period. Alina was sitting at the table with her friends. Ordinarily, it would have been intimidating to walk up to a table of girls, most of whom were pretty and toned from years of soccer, field hockey, and track. But I could tell by the way Alina was sitting with her tray in her lap, her chair pushed back from the table, that she would like nothing more than an excuse to leave. We were allowed to eat our lunches outside, but no one ever did during the winter. We got some funny looks pushing open the doors and slipping out into the yellowing grass. I'd been looking forward to telling Alina the story of the widower's clock for hours, but now that I was alone with her, I hesitated to jump straight into it. Are you okay? Alina shifted uncomfortably. Yeah, but I haven't done so great with crowds lately, especially when I'm eating. We were huddled in the corner of the doorway, trying to use the building to block the wind. I was nervous as I reached out to rub her arm, what I hoped was an understanding and reassuring gesture. She didn't flinch or pull away, she just stared at my hand for a long second before she whispered, "Thanks." I started telling her the story, exactly as Carrie told it to me, but had barely begun when the switch flipped in Alina's head, and she remembered where she heard it before. East Boston camps. Pretty much everyone in our town went to summer camp there when we were kids, but it was only 15 minutes outside of Nashua. One of the counselors there had been like Carrie and me. She used to delight in telling her ghost stories to younger campers. He loved it. He used to delight in telling ghost stories to younger campers. He loved it when the kids were too scared to sleep and kept their cabin chaperones up all night. For a second, I forgot why we were trying to track down this story and got lost in memories of camp. But Alina didn't. "Do you think this has anything to do with why he killed himself?" Her voice was steady, But she fixed me with her eyes, and I could see how desperate she was for me to answer yes. Desperate to believe that it wasn't her fault. I think he suffered from depression. Alina's lip quivered, and her eyes filled with tears. I hugged her. Hey, listen to me. You didn't kill him. Alina gripped the collar of my flannel shirt and buried her head against my chest. I stood there, holding her, as she cried. The two of us were late to 5th period. At the end of the day, Fletcher was waiting for me in the parking lot. He'd already turned his car on and cranked the heater up to full blast. Even still, we were halfway home before it was warm enough for me to open up my jacket. He stared out the window. Dude, what's going on with you and Alina? I tried to look at him. His jaw was set, and for the first time in our lives, Fletch reminded me of his hard-ass father. I really didn't want to answer him. She asked me about a ghost story. Fletch's only answer was to let his eyes drift from the road. He studied my face for a long moment before he finally said, Which one? The widower's clock. It's the one where I know that one. It was barely a whisper. Are you in a hurry to get home? No. Good. Fletch pulled over by the side of the road, took a shuddering breath and punched the steering wheel twice and started bawling. He let it out. Everything he'd been holding in at school, everything that he'd been holding in around his dad, everything. Alina had been sad. Fletch was purging. During the days following Rob's suicide, seeing people break down like this was common, and it continued on longer in the morning counseling sessions, but at some point people put their guard back up. What had been appropriate emotions one day was suddenly back to being taboo the next, and for people like Fletch, they weren't ready to be in that emotional space again. Once he'd gotten most of it out, we started talking. Really talking. I know it's unfair, he said. I know it's not. Sure, he tried to be nice. But I'm sorry, I just fucking hate her. I didn't exactly blame Fletch for how he felt. Nate was a good guy. He knew that Elena wasn't obligated to reciprocate Rob's feelings simply because he was nice to her, but he watched his friend, dead or alive, burn for 4 hours, and part of him wondered if it would have still happened if only Elena had given Rob a chance. You know, that's too much pressure to put on anyone, I said. I know. I reminded Fletch of everything the counselors had told us. That feeling sad when you've been rejected is natural. It's normal behavior. It's a healthy behavior. You should feel sad whenever someone doesn't want to reciprocate their feelings. It is sad. But while there's always something that makes a person decide that they want to kill themselves now and not tomorrow or last week, it's not the final straw that breaks their back. It's all the weight that came before it. The underlying mental illness. Fletch looked down at his hands. Yeah. There was no conviction in his voice. Fletch pulled his t-shirt up to his face and wiped the last of his tears away. He then started the car and we were moving, riding in silence. After a few minutes, Fletch spoke again. He thinks he found it. What? Widower's clock. It was my turn to stare at Nate. That's impossible. You want to read it? The note he left for me? In the period of time between the end of the Civil War and the start of the 1920s, the population of Boston, Massachusetts, had more than tripled. In fact, there were more people living in Boston in the 1920s than there are today. This put an amazing strain on the city's resources, particularly on their drinking water. To solve their water problem, the Commonwealth of Massachusetts undertook a number of public work projects, redirecting rivers and creating reservoirs. The largest of which is the Quabbin Reservoir on the Swift River Valley of western Massachusetts. The Quabbin covers nearly 80 square miles and sports an impressive 180 miles of shoreline. Creating the Quabbin meant flooding much of the Swift River Valley, and the Swift River Valley was home to 4 towns. Donna to the northeast, and Prescott to the northwest, with Greenwich wedged between them, and Enfield in the southwest. Enfield, where the Widower's Clock was supposedly built, now sits mostly submerged by 412 billion gallons of water. How in the hell would Robert Keenan have found anything there at all? What would there even be to find? 60 some odd years in a flood after the fact, and it's not as though the Swift River Valley was flooded overnight. The people had years to move their homes and relocate out of the flood zone. Why would they leave behind a whole building? If it was there, wouldn't a clock tower peeking out of the water tend to draw the eye? I never felt comfortable in Fletch's house. The first floor felt like a museum. Mr. Fletcher was strict, but it was Mrs. Fletcher who wanted her house to always resemble the cover of an interior decorating magazine. Now call me crazy, but what's the point of having a house you're afraid to live in? Fletcher's room, on the other hand, had the opposite problem. First time I ever came over at Mrs. Fletcher's insistence, I had to take my shoes off to go upstairs and then put them back on in Nate's room because while he was sure there was broken glass somewhere, Fletcher wasn't quite sure where. As you could imagine, Nathan Fletcher and his mother fought quite a bit. Fletch gestured to his bed, and I parked myself on the corner of it with the few dirty clothes. What few prized possessions he owned, Fletch kept in the bottom right-hand drawer of the desk. But that's not where he pulled Rob's letter out of. No, the letter he kept tucked in a book on top of his nightstand. It occurred to me that he must have been reading it often. The invasion of privacy I felt when I read Alina's letter was nothing. Nothing compared to reading Fletch's as he sat next to me. The letter was exponentially more personal. Rob was exposed on the page. Reading it made me feel like I had walked in on him naked. Whereas the letter Rob gave Alina revealed a lot about himself, and next to nothing about her, this letter revealed a great deal about Rob as well as Fletch. Fletch and Rob had bonded when Rob was new and Fletch was going through his awkward phase. Apparently I had been wrong about Fletch not getting down whenever he said the wrong thing. Warm and funny, confident around his friends, Fletch had spent most of his early teens afraid to speak in public. Maybe I hadn't noticed because he was older and I sort of looked up to him, or maybe I was just too absorbed in my own insecurities to see anyone else that they had their own. Either way, it was news to me. Rob's note to Alina had expressed a measure of guilt for leaving everyone behind to deal with the aftermath of his death. But in the letter he gave to Fletch, the guilt he articulated feeling was for having lived. He apologized profusely for having been a burden. He described himself alternatively as a baby and a leech, a drain on anyone foolish enough to move too close to him, and though he knew no one would see it like he did, Rob viewed his suicide as a charitable act. He was ridding his friends and family of himself. Despite my discomforts, reading such a personal letter, I devoured every word. I consumed the letter, hoping after each line that the next would finally illuminate for me what Robert Keenan had to do with the Widower's Clock, and finally, tucked amongst a list of reasons why he was going to go through with it, was what I'd been looking for. I will soon join them, staring at her face as she runs the endless race. I will soon join them, staring at her face as she runs the endless race. I looked up, disappointed and annoyed with how little Rob had written about the Widower's Clock, to find Fletch rocking back and forth in his chair. Made me feel like a piece of shit. You said he thought he found it. Yeah. How? Nathan Fletcher looked up at me with watery eyes and told me everything. Rob's medication had his depression mostly under control for the last 3 years. He still had bouts, but they were less frequent, less severe than he had been before, along with his much improved disposition. Rob had also been sleeping better, eating more, and his energy was way up, but he was never exactly happy. See, that's something most people don't understand about depression. It's not a mood, it's a disorder. Having the symptoms of this disorder in check doesn't make Rob happy, it made him not depressed. Rob still struggled to fit in and enjoy life. He was still unpopular. He was still misunderstood. One of the first things that Robert Keenan really enjoyed was running. He especially enjoyed cross-country. If I had to guess what appeal long-distance running held for Rob, I'd say that for someone who already felt their loneliness in a crowd, it must have been a relief to actually be alone. Just him, the woods, the next mile. And the Quabbin Reservoir offered a lot of next miles. Rob had been exploring its trails since he was a child, when they lived in Amherst. His family used to visit the Quabbin on the weekends. They'd hike or picnic, and occasionally Mr. Keenan would take his two sons fishing. As a teenager, Rob looked for any excuse that he could find to get down there and just go, one foot in front of the other, till sundown, when visitors had to leave. Well, that summer, the summer of 1999, Rob made a lot of excuses to visit Quabbin. He had, for the third time, mustered up the courage to tell Elena Amenev how he felt about her, and for the third time he had been rebuked. This time, a little less gently than before. It left Rob with a growing impression that the love of his life found him creepy. Running was the only thing that got his mind off of it. The Fletchers had 3 boys. The oldest, Samuel, had gone down to UMass, and after graduation found work in the university's IT department. Fletch visited his brother often, and whenever he did, Rob would hitch a ride down to the Quabbin. Fletch would usually drop him off in the morning, and Rob would get picked up by family he still had in Amherst, or he would call Fletch's brother from the visitor center at the south end of the Windsor Dam, and Fletch would come get him. Once Rob had lost track of time and found himself after sundown, miles from the visitor center, that's when he heard them for the first time. Bells tolling the hour. They were scarcely detectable, as if they'd traveled a great distance and they had an odd, muffled quality that made them sound soft and deep. Rob stopped running and listened. He forgot all about Elena, forgot about contacting Fletch, forgot that he was an hour's drive away from the nearest person that he knew. He stood in the woods and turned to the wind to listen to this beautiful sound. If he was anything like me when I first heard them, he was overcome by a physical sensation of feeling like slipping under a warm blanket on a cold night. Then they were gone. Rob found himself once again in the dark woods with no idea how he'd get home. There's a trailer park, somewhat unusual in Massachusetts, a couple of miles southeast of the visitor center. Rob was lucky enough to get picked up on the road by one of its residents. She's probably barely 40, but looked like she was pushing 60. Smoked continuously, and was the one who told Rob about what she called the spire in the woods. To her, the spire in the woods wasn't a ghost story. It was simply a fact of life. Like blind curves and sinkholes, one that was best to be avoided. She didn't have a first-hand account of her own, but she'd heard plenty of stories. She knew that some of the boys from her trailer park enjoyed getting drunk, getting stoned, and pissing in the reservoir late at night. They'd get a little thrill out of the idea that somewhere in Boston, some Harvard grad was drinking their urine. Occasionally, one of the boys would come back to his trailer, unsettled at having heard the eerie beauty of the bells. Quabbin Reserve was peppered with islands. The woman said the source of the bells was on one of them. An island just to the north of where the old Ware-Enfield Road turns into Quabbin Hill. Somewhere hidden in that island's wild-grown trees, the peak of an old spire, the sort that you might see on the top of a church, juts out of the ground. Now and again someone went looking for it and never came back. Rumor around the trailer park was that back in 1996, John Wilkins and his cousin Anna found it, but only John came back. He killed himself about a month later. Since then, the park mothers had kept an extra close watch on their boys. Rob didn't really believe in any of it. He wasn't like me. The spire in the woods wasn't a spiritual quest. He wasn't trying to cling to the last lingering shreds of faith. He just wanted to hear the sound again, hear the bells as they chimed the hour. have that feeling of warmth and security wash over him. In the weeks that followed, Rob thought of nothing except the sound of the bells. Fletch thought that Rob was embellishing the incident, letting his memory get the best of him, but Rob was adamant that they were the most beautiful sound he'd ever heard. He insisted that something in the aging bells, or the wind, as it carried the trolling through the woods, or the acoustics of the rock and the dirt surrounding the spire, lent them an ethereal quality. He was determined to find the spire. Rob began researching the Quabbin, and it wasn't long before he realized the connection between the spire and the widower's clock. He dismissed the ghost story, but he was thrilled that a master artisan lived in Enfield and sunk his fortune into constructing a clock tower, complete with bells and chimes. Fletch was skeptical. If Rob had heard anything at all, it must have come from somewhere else. A neighboring town, a proper church. Tower bells weigh hundreds, if not thousands of pounds. What would be ringing them? The wind? It would take a hurricane. But Rob was unfazed. He was going to find the spire in the woods. He was going to hear the bells again, and Fletch didn't see the harm in letting him try. A week before school started, Fletch set off for Amherst with Rob in tow. The pair of them spent the evening with Sam and his friends before cutting out around 9:45, heading down Route 9 until they reached Old Ware Enfield Road. They parked the car near the trailer park and hoofed it the 2 miles up or so to Old Ware, to the shore of the reservoir nearest the island, one of which Rob was positive housed the spire in the woods. Each having worn swimsuits under their clothes, they simply stripped down, stashed their things, and slipped into the water. The nearest island lay about 200 yards from the shore, and Fletch, never a strong swimmer, quickly realized he didn't have it in him to make it there. After a brief argument while treading water, Fletch turned back and Rob went on alone. They'd agreed Fletch would meet Rob back by Route 9 at 4 a.m. Fletch sat on the trunk of his car for hours, swatting mosquitoes, listening to frogs and crickets. First he was worried about Rob. Then he was pissed that Rob had gone by himself. Then he was worried again. Fletch set the alarm on his watch around 1:30 or so. Laid out on his back seat, drifted off to sleep, wishing that he was drinking at his brother's. Fletch awoke to the passenger side door being thrown open. Rob jumped in and slammed the door closed. Drive! Drive! Fletch scrambled into the front seat, assuming park officials or the police were on pursuit. He gunned the engine and pulled out of the trailer park. Fletch was already on Route 9 before he haphazarded a glance at his friend. Rob was panicked. What happened? What happened? Rob said nothing. He just labored to catch his breath as he looked back towards the reservoir. Rob's adrenaline slipped away as Fletch drove. By the time they reached Sam's apartment, Rob was practically catatonic. It took me weeks to pry it out of him, Fletch said. He saw something down there. He found the spire? I asked. Fletch nodded. Did he go in? Rob had reached the first island. He'd been searching fruitlessly for nearly 40 minutes when he heard them. The bells. Being so much closer now, they were even clearer. He fell to his knees, letting their sensation, their warmth, wash over him for just a moment. He knew bliss. The bells rolled back like the ocean at low tide. Rob found himself shivering on the ground. He could hear nothing but frogs and crickets. He rose on unsteady legs, sure of only one thing. In an hour, he'd be there. He'd be standing before the spire. He'd hear the bells, feel them up close. He ran to the shore and dove into the waters. Rob emerged from the reservoir onto the rocky bank of the second and far larger island. He stumbled barefoot through the woods, increasingly aware of how dark it was beneath the trees, and the bell's siren call faded in his mind. He began to doubt himself. The island was nearly 2 miles long and a half-mile across. He could search it all night and never find a damn thing. The bells chimed once more. He turned to face them. And there it was. In the center of a grove of dead trees, the spire jutted out from the ground like a pike set to receive a charge. Its white paint was oddly untouched by age. Small windows adorned each of its sides, framed by the dead trees and bathed in moonlight, it called Unable to resist their song, yet too overwhelmed by their warmth to walk, Rob crawled to the spire like an infant to its mother. He pushed against the slats of the window. They gave way and he squirmed his way inside. Rob landed onto the top of the staircase. As the bells continued to chime, he pulled his shuddering body down the stairs, deeper and deeper into the enveloping darkness within, until he found himself once more in the ethereal sounds and their radiating warmth. Once the silence returned, Rob strained in vain to see. The air was humid and black as ink. He could feel wood, dank and rotting, pressing against his bare calves. It gave him the impression he was sitting Indian style inside of a living thing, like Jonah in the whale. Slowly, Rob rose to his feet. He held his hands out in front of him, and he groped blindly. He hoped that he'd find a wall or a banister to the stairs, anything that would give him a clue about his surroundings. Instead, he found nothing. Forcing himself to shuffle deeper into the impermeable darkness, his outstretched fingers recoiled from the soft surface they encountered. What was it? He shook as he reached out, letting his hands land once more on the chest-high object in front of him. It only extended out to about the width of his shoulders. The cloth hung loose over something hard that his hands couldn't identify. Rods? Dowels? His probing fingers traced up the object's outer edge until he felt something he could identify. He froze. His fingers were in the eye socket of a skull. His thumb rested on its teeth. The bells rang again, if only inside Rob, as his mind's eye showed him the endless dance. He sat there in the dark, his unseeing eyes transfixed by the clockmaker's wife as she was dragged on her post through the twirling gauntlet of union automations. He saw her, alive and dead, the blush of youth, the maggot of decay, twitch and scream and moan as her body was pierced by countless bayonets. He saw her face as she ran the endless race. Rob shrank and shriveled, collapsing to the floor. Like a wounded animal, he crawled and he clawed his way back until he hit the wall, and even then he didn't stop. He pushed against it with all of his strength, hoping to retreat further. His flailing limbs struck a step, the first of many. With what little control he had over his frenzied mind, bolted for the surface and an escape from the moist pit and the clockmaker's wife. Rob scrambled up the twisting stairs on all fours like a dog. He tore his way through the window and collapsed on the ground. Fresh air felt alien in his lungs, as if it were his first breath. He took two more as he lay on the ground, but realized that although he hadn't a clue what time it was, he couldn't be there when the bells chimed. He ran and swam and ran and swam, and he didn't look back until he was in the car. Fletch put his face in his hands. I shouldn't have let him go alone. So you believe him? I tried to say, in as comforting a tone as I could, but I think it came out a little accusatory. Fletch hesitated. Yeah, I do. I had so many questions I wanted to ask him, but I didn't think Fletch could take it. He choked up several times while relaying Rob's story, and the way that his shoulders were slumping reminded me of the way Rob's parents had looked at his son's funeral. I should have gone with him, he said, looking up at me. I let it lie. As I left Fletch's house, every hair on my body was standing on end, but at that point, as much as I wanted to, I still wasn't ready to accept the story of a spire in the woods. Not at face value. When we studied The Fall of the House of Usher in English earlier that year, Mrs. Thorne had made it a point to draw our attention to two of Poe's opium references, and how Roderick Escher displayed symptoms of withdrawal. She explained that Poe's stories frequently incorporated both blatant and subtle references to intoxications and hallucinogenics, in order to enhance the sense of phantasmagoria and help more skeptical readers suspend their disbelief. I knew very little about depression, and even less about antidepressants, but at the time, I didn't think it was beyond the realm of possibility that Robert Keenan's encounter with the clockmaker's wife had more to do with the sudden onset of major depression episodes than with a dead woman. I spent the night reading about depression, tricyclic, MAO inhibitors, and SSRIs. There were no answers, just endless possibilities. It wasn't unheard of for major depressive episodes to be accompanied by delusions or even outright hallucinations. Psychotic disorders were sometimes less obvious in patients whose presenting problem with depression. Hallucinations were rare side effects of SSRIs, and MAO inhibitors could cause serotonin syndrome, which can cause hallucinations. That was before getting into the countless drug interactions, which, without knowing exactly what Rob was taking, couldn't begin to map out. I knew Scary Carrie would love to hear every detail Fletch had told me about the spire in the woods, but on Tuesday morning, I just didn't feel like tracking her down. I wanted to talk to Alina. The ride into school hadn't been as awkward as I had anticipated. Fletch was quieter than usual, and I was content to stare out my window and daydream about what I was going to tell Alina. I wondered what she thought about Fletch's story, and whether or not I should gloss over my own doubts. I also wondered if she'd cry. I feel embarrassed, even all these years later admitting it, but a part of me was hoping that she would. Then I'd have an excuse to hug her again. They could be dependable, comforting, boyfriend material. It was the kind of fantasy that marked me as a beta male, the sort of guy who even in his own daydreams couldn't think of a single reason that he deserved the girl. I roved the junior high hallways and the cafeteria, but I couldn't find Alina anywhere. I heard from DeLuca that she called out sick. I spent the rest of the day in a funk. Carrie and I had gym 7th period, the last class of the day. It was too cold to go out to the field, so we had to choose between 3 or 4 indoor activities. Ordinarily, I would have opted for floor hockey, the only gym class activity I ever really enjoyed, but I felt obligated to update Carrie on what I'd learned about Rob and the Spire, so I joined her in the auxiliary gym for a little ping pong, a game I had no idea she was good at. Or it could have happened exactly like that, Carrie said, acing me for the 3rd straight time. I was surprised that Scary Carrie wasn't as skeptical as I was. I mean, sure, Carrie absolutely believed in ghosts, and, of course, I desperately wanted to, but we weren't completely credulous about every story that we heard. We didn't relish wandering around graveyards and old buildings for no good reason. We weren't looking to kill time. We did it because we wanted to find something. We wanted to pull back the curtain and glimpse the grandeur of creation. We wanted to feel small in the presence of the infinite and know, if only for a moment, it was more than food, sex, and the petty minutiae of social interaction. What it came down to was that while I believed Fletch and I believed that Fletch believed Rob, I didn't know that I believed Rob. There was a difference between lying and being wrong. Carrie and I had developed criteria for identifying the more promising leads, and the Spire in the Woods had a lot going against it. Secondhand accounts, stories with an undercut of the social control, witnesses with a history of mental illness, these were red flags. And Rob's story had all of them. Do you want to check it out? It's kind of cold for a swim. I just want to see if we can hear the bells. Yeah, maybe. I don't know, it's kind of far. Of course, there's another reason I was reluctant to head all the way to Quabbin Reservoir with Scary Carrie. She looked at me like I had just insulted her. She knew precisely what the other reason was. Our last ghost hunting expedition had been a disaster. A very personal disaster. Carrie was old for our year. She turned 16 at the tail end of our freshman year and had gotten her license the very first day of summer break. It was perfect, save for one thing. No car. Carrie's parents were divorced. Her dad had moved to New Jersey for a job. He paid his alimony and child support every month, but he just wasn't a very wealthy man. Carrie's mom had never gone to college. She had to work full-time at the deli counter at a local market basket just to make ends meet, which meant most days she had the car. But at night, when the store was closed, Carrie had access to the world's oldest, crappiest station wagon. For the most part, Carrie's newfound freedom changed her life very little. Mainly, her trips involved picking up the members of her small group of friends and delivering them to Dan Bergen's to watch anime and other horror movies in his basement. We only hung out twice that summer. Both times Scary Carrie picked me up in what I called Ecto 1, and we went ghost hunting. Our first trip was to the blood cemetery. That's how we discovered the story of Abel Blood was, well, a steaming load. We dressed in all black, par the course in Carrie's case, and brought flashlights, wax paper, and crayons. We also took the silver crucifixes my parents had given me as a First Communion present, and my mother's Bible, just in case we saw something. It was fun scrambling over the old stone wall, sneaking through the cemetery with our flashlights held low, trying not to step on anybody's grave. Even after seeing that the years of death didn't line up, we still checked out the curve where the ghost of the little girl supposedly ran out in front of the passing cars. The blind curve was indeed full of skid marks. It also had about 20 feet in front of it a deer crossing sign. But even after seeing that, the years of death did 2 or 3 weeks later, we went to a charity auction at the rec center and slipped up the stairs to the attic. The stairs squeaked beneath our feet, and even though, at worst, we'd just be thrown out of the rec center, we were terrified of getting caught. The attic hadn't changed in the 7 or so years since my last visit. A couple of card tables housed bins full of crafting materials, a pair of filing cabinets sat against the back wall gathering dust. And most importantly of all, despite it being June, there were still cold spots. We'd just stand outside of one, reach an arm in, and try to define the boundary of the warm and cold air. It was tricky. The shift in temperature wasn't as great as I remember from when I was a kid, and there were no hard, fine edges between the hot and the cold air. The temperature just seemed to bleed from one area to another, like brine in an estuary. I experimented sticking my crucifix into the heart of the cold spot and felt nothing. If anything, it felt like the cold spots were fading away. Carrie suggested we tried talking to the spirit of Jennifer Wilkins while we still could. I shrugged. After you. We'd forsaken most of our ghost hunting kit, as it would have been awfully conspicuous carrying around a Bible and a couple of flashlights. I still had my crucifix, but I doubted it'd be necessary. The stories of the Silver Spectre were all quite tame. We had, however, brought a couple of sticks of incense, which we lit with a very old Zippo that had once belonged to my grandfather. Carrie had bought the incense from a New Age store, sort of place that you shop at if you were inclined to believe in neo-paganism or healing crystals. The saleswoman told her it was supposed to make it easier for spirits to pass into our realm. But to me, it just smelled like sandalwood. Carrie spoke in a lilting tone. "Jennifer, are you here with us?" I burst out laughing and Carrie went beet red. She punched me in the arm and whispered for me to be quiet, pointing to the floor where beneath our feet the auction was taking place. Carrie tried again. "Jennifer, if you can hear me, give us a sign." We stood still in absolute silence, waiting for an answer. It came in the form of an industrial air conditioner mounted to the ceiling of the floor below us, cycling on. A few gasps in the floorboards lining up perfectly with the AC's large vents. We couldn't stop laughing at the spirit of Jennifer returning the cold spots to full force. Once we'd regained our composure, Carrie and I decided to head over to Bickford's for a bite to eat, while we conducted the post-mortem on our latest failure. Now, a deer crossing sign and an air conditioner doesn't necessarily disprove that Blood Cemetery and our town rec center are haunted, but they certainly made us feel rather foolish. So while I'd gorged myself on Eggs Benedict, which I had only recently discovered, and Carrie nursed a cup of coffee, we started tossing around ideas for other expeditions. "No local place," she said. "Gotta stay objective. Can't be some place that we've grown up thinking is haunted." You just don't want anyone we know hearing our little sing-talking to the spirit world voice. Carrie, in mock anger, reached over, grabbed a home fry off my plate, and threw it at me. It had taken her a long time to get comfortable with me teasing her. I guess after a lifetime of being mocked about her weight and her appearance, the idea that it was only the way I expressed affection took some getting used to. There was a few places in and around Boston that we wanted to check out, but most of them were landmarks or buildings that were still in use. Neither of us was eager to get arrested, particularly not Carrie, who was going to have a hard enough time getting into college, so Boston was out. And most of Lowell, too. We dismissed a couple of nearby legends, the Gelson Road Cemetery, which had no actual history surrounding it, just a hodgepodge of random urban legends, and the Blue Lady out in Wilton, New Hampshire, who sounded somewhat promising, but was most frequently sighted during the harvest moons, which we wouldn't get until late September. Eventually, we settled on Eunice Williams' covered bridge in Greenfield, Massachusetts. It had everything going for it, a traumatic event, consistent sightings, and no air conditioning. The only downside was that for us, Greenfield was a solid 2-hour drive each way, and that was if the MapQuest directions were up to date. My big if. I didn't see Carrie again that summer. Life just got in the way. For Carrie, it was too difficult to work around her mom's schedule, especially after a tiny little accident she had backing out of a space at a mall, resulting in her losing her privileges for a month. Well, for me, it was the pool Christy McDowell's parents had put in that June. All my feelings for Christy and our other mutual female friends was mostly platonic. I was 15, and they were in bikinis. By comparison, ghost hunting just didn't seem quite as exciting. Knowing how my friends felt about her, I never invited Kelly to tag along. Of course, in fairness to me, pool parties weren't exactly her cup of tea. When school started up again in the fall, Carrie and I resumed talking about our trip to Greenfield, but it wasn't until Rob Keenan killed himself and I made an effort to spend more time with her that we got around to actually going. Carrie picked me up one Friday evening in mid-November. Mrs. Peterson had opened the store that morning and would be closing the next day, meaning that we had Ecto 1 all night. We just needed to get her car back before she woke up, and she'd be none the wiser. Driving around with friends was still novel at that point in my life. 3 hours passed by in a blur of jokes and gossip and screaming along to what little music Carrie and I could agree on. She used to have this mixtape dominated by Nine Inch Nails and Rage Against the Machine that was a staple of our time in Ecto 1. I think we listened to it straight through 2.5 times that night. We only got turned around once and arrived at Eunice Williams' covered bridge absolutely pumped. We pulled into the bridge, cut the motor, honked once, and waited for Eunice. Now, Eunice Williams was not a resident of Greenfield. She had actually lived in a nearby Deerfield back in the late 1600s. At the time, Deerfield was the northwesternmost post of New England. Deep in the heart of the former... At the time, Deerfield was the northwesternmost outpost of New England, deep in the heart of the former Pocumtuck Nation. Before the settlers had arrived in Deerfield, the Pocumtuck had already been weakened by European diseases and war with the Mohawk people. When the settlers and Pocumtuck clashed over resources, the settlers easily drove the remaining Pocumtuck from the land. Well, the Pocumtuck, however, were not ready to admit defeat. They allied themselves with French settlers and other French-allied First Peoples in Canada, and in 1704 led an offensive raid against Deerfield's English settlers. The French and Native Americans killed 56 settlers and burned much of the town to the ground, captured over 100 survivors, and forced them to march through the brutal winters into Quebec. The march would take months. Among the captured survivors was Eunice Mather Williams, her husband, Minister John Williams, and 5 of their 7 children. Their infant daughter and 6.5-year-old son were both killed during the raid, but John and Eunice were determined to be strong for their other children and fellow captives. The Williamses quoted scripture, led the group in prayer, and took turns carrying their younger children until they reached the Green River. Eunice fell during the crossing. Despite having survived her plunge, the Pocumtuck warriors decided that Eunice's exposure to the icy water had weakened her too much to continue the march. So, he hacked her to pieces in front of her husband and the remaining children. Legend has it that Eunice appeared on the bridge over the waters where she was killed, asking any mortals that she finds there of news of her children and husband. Locals say that she can be summoned simply by cutting your engine and honking your horn. Now, we'd been sitting there in Ecto 1 with the engine off and no heat when a thought occurred to me. Why would the ghost of a woman who died a couple of centuries before the invention of the automobile, respond to a horn being honked. I could see the gears turning in Scary Carrie's head as she processed the anachronism. Well, maybe she's just... Fuck. I laughed as Carrie turned on the car to get the heat going again. And you couldn't have thought of this before we drove out here? She asked. Well, maybe the bridge isn't haunted, just that Eunice probably isn't a car gal. We waited for a bit, then got out of the car and poked around the bridge on foot. I've always liked covered bridges, ever since seeing Disney's The Legend of Sleepy Hollow cartoon as a kid. And there's a nifty little plaque at this one that tells the whole story of Eunice Williams. We scrambled down to the banks of the river. It's not exactly the Mississippi, but it was easy to see how difficult it would have been to ford, especially under the strained circumstances Eunice was facing. I skipped a few pebbles, a difficult feat in fast-moving water before you get cold, and we decided to get back to the car. Maybe it was the increasingly likely prospect that another of our missions had gone to prove to be a waste, or maybe it was just the hour and the warm air of the heater blasting on our faces and making us sleepy. But whatever the cause, our energy was fading fast, and our conversation had turned serious. Well, serious by high school standards. Do you think that Kim Murray's pretty? I did not think she was pretty, but that put me in a precarious position. Physically, Kim had her faults, but objectively speaking, she was significantly more attractive than Carrie, a girl Drew DeLuca once described with what was, for Drew, a considerable amount of sympathy as unfortunate looking. Carrie shifted in her seat to face me. I don't know. Never gave much thought to it. Why? We were at Dan's the other night, and she was talking about how much she likes knowing that guys masturbate while thinking about her. Yeah, I don't think this is a topic of conversation I want to pursue. Carrie grunted softly. That's what I said. It's kind of gross. There was a pause. When Carrie spoke again, her voice caught in her throat. And then Kim said, well then, I guess you're lucky. You don't have to worry about anyone doing that over you. My cheeks burned with embarrassment. I didn't know what to say. I never imagined Kim would share her sexual insecurities with me. In part because I never thought of her in sexual terms. On some levels, I didn't think I'd ever fully processed for me that Carrie was a girl, like Elena or Christy. That's not to say that I was confused about her gender identity, but because I found her unattractive, my mind had neutered her and had significantly reduced her as a Carrie started to cry. And I leaned over to give her a hug. She let out a few hushed sobs onto my shoulder as I patted her broad back, and at some point she stopped crying. It took me a second to notice, but what I thought was her taking a shuddering breath, or maybe just a tear-covered cheek sliding across my skin, was actually Carrie kissing my neck. I wanted to leap into the back seat to lurch away from Carrie and retreat to the furthest recess of Ecto 1. I wanted to throw open my door. I wanted to sprint to the nearest house and demand its occupants permit to shower. But I couldn't do that. As revolted as I was that my actions and intention had been so wildly misconstrued, Carrie was still my friend, and she was vulnerable, and she didn't deserve that. I froze, hoping that she'd realize I wasn't reciprocating. The nuzzling and kissing continued. I guess she didn't, or maybe she didn't realize that this was a red flag. We never spoke about what happened in Greenfield, but either way, she needed a clearer stop sign. I put my hand on her shoulder and gently pushed myself away from her. She got the message. I don't think of you like that. I had trouble spitting it out. She nodded. We're friends, I said. Uh-huh. The trip home was one of the longest car rides of my life. Carrie never turned on the radio. The only words out of my mouth were the turns I called out for our MapQuest directions. I felt shallow. I think we both knew that I'd only said we're friends to soften the blow. I wouldn't have dismissed the affection of any other female friends so readily. Even Christy McDowell, whom I'd been friends with since the 3rd grade. I would never have pushed her away like that. The following Monday, I made it a point to talk to Carrie in class like nothing happened. She played along for a bit, but then asked me for a little space. Frankly, I was relieved to give it to her. I only told a couple of people about Scary Carrie kissing my neck. DeLuca thought that it was hilarious. He wasn't the most sensitive guy in the world. Carrie was a bit more sympathetic. She reminded me that I was entitled to have my tastes. I appreciated hearing that. But I still felt like shit. I'd set out to make Carrie feel better about herself and had done nothing of the kind. I never thought of myself as the sort of guy who'd judge a girl based on her looks, but apparently I was. Elena didn't return to school for a whole week after our last conversation. She told everyone who asked that she'd had the flu, but later confessed to me that she couldn't take being surrounded by people. It was too noisy, too overwhelming, too many eyes staring at her. She needed to be alone. I didn't see her at lunch that day. Or ever again. The anxiety she felt, being surrounded by people, was at its worst when she was trying to eat. So her parents arranged for her to eat in her guidance counselor's office. When I found out, I knew that it was good for Alina, but I couldn't help but feel like my days would be a little drearier without being able to see her across the cafeteria. Her wild hair, that smirk if it ever returned, and that was to say nothing of the wonder that years of track and cross-country had done for her legs. I finally caught up with her on Friday morning. She was at her locker. To cut down on the amount of time she'd have to spend jammed between chatty classmates, Alina had taken to cramming every book and binder she needed until lunch into her backpack. She looked like a freshman. Hey, Alina. She didn't look up. Oh, hey. I dropped down next to where she was crouching and lowered my voice. I spoke with Fletch. Alina froze. I couldn't tell if she was nervous or excited. She took a couple of deep breaths and she turned towards me. Do you see it? Yeah. Basically, said the same thing as yours. She deflated but continued. But then he told me what happened. Are you going to be at lunch? She bit her lower lip, and she considered for a second. No. Oh, well, we could... What do you have last period? Gym? Can you skip it? I'd never cut a class in my life. Absolutely. I work with a volunteer search and rescue team in northern Montana. Most of the time we're responding to injuries, lost hikers, the usual. Last week we found a man barefoot, half frozen, and covered in blood, stumbling down a trail we hadn't used in decades. We thought he was a missing hunter. He wasn't. We brought him back to base camp. He wouldn't tell us his name. He kept muttering, "It let me go, it let me go," over and over like a prayer. He hadn't eaten in days. We offered food. He refused. When we insisted, he screamed. He said it would know. Later, while the others were out on a call, I sat with him alone, and we started to talk. He said he was part of a 3-man group hunting elk deep in the wilderness. He said one night something found their camp. Not a bear, not a wolf. Something tall, thin, bones stretched over skin. Teeth like needles. He never called it a name. But I did. I asked, "A Wendigo?" He flinched when I said it. "No," he whispered. "The Wendigo." He said it didn't kill them right away. It took them, one at a time, always at night. Always when they were alone. It took Tom first, left only his tongue. Then it dragged off Caleb, said he heard Caleb laughing as it took him. But it wasn't Caleb's laugh. By the 3rd night, he was alone. He ran, got lost, starved, heard it whispering to him, not words, just thoughts, promises. He said he saw it watching him while he slept. Said it left bits of his friends in the snow like breadcrumbs, and then it let him go. Just like that. He said it stood over him at dawn, mouthful of Caleb's face, and whispered inside his mind. "You're all mine." I didn't know what to say. He looked at me with eyes that hadn't blinked in hours and said, "You don't get it. It's not out there anymore." Then he pointed at his chest. "It's in here." I didn't sleep after that conversation. He just sat there in the infirmary cot, staring at the wall, not moving, not blinking, like the thought of rest no longer applied to whatever was left of him. And the next morning he was gone. No signs of forced entry, no broken windows. The med tent zipper was still latched from the inside, but the inside of the cot was wet. Not blood, not sweat, just wet. Like something cold had melted there overnight. We followed the tracks as far as we could, but the snowfall had buried most of them. Just a trail of smeared boot prints that veered off the marked paths and disappeared into the timberline. That night I was posted at the south edge of base camp. Forest edge. Quiet. Too quiet. I couldn't shake the feeling something was just behind the tree line. Watching. Not moving. Just waiting for me to move first. At some point past midnight, I heard footsteps behind the mess tent. I went to check it out and found two things. One, a chunk of raw venison missing from the storage cooler. It hadn't been sliced or bitten. It had been scraped apart. Nails maybe, something dull and rough. And two, a trail of footprints in the snow. Barefoot. They led about 20 yards into the woods before they stopped, like the person who made them had either taken flight or vanished into the trees. We logged it, set motion cams, increased watch shifts. But 2 nights later, one of the volunteers went missing. We found what was left of him scattered across a tree like someone had hung clothes to dry. Rib cage split and hollow. Tongue left whole. Eyes gone. The cameras caught nothing but static between 1:13 and 1:21 a.m. And somewhere in that static, on a single frozen frame we saw something tall, standing just outside the infrared range. And a few feet in front of it, him, a survivor, smiling, mouth open wider than I thought possible, shoulders hunched like he'd grown something underneath the skin that didn't fit right. We shut down the camp the next day. I stayed behind to help collect the equipment. Last one out, just me and the trees. I don't know why I opened the meat locker before I left. Curiosity maybe, or something closer to instinct. He was inside. Not hiding, just crouched in the corner, naked, hands raw, skin torn at the fingertips like claws were trying to push their way out. His mouth was moving, not speaking, just chewing. I didn't move. He looked at me just for a second, and I swear he said something, but I didn't hear it with my ears. It was in my bones. You don't have to run anymore. Then he vanished. No sound, just gone. I still don't know how. But every night since, I hear something at my window. It doesn't knock. It just breathes. And sometimes I catch myself breathing with it. My father disappeared when I was young. It was the only tragedy of my childhood. Sort of news that spread like a disease through the small town where I lived. There was more than one teacher who stuttered to halt on my last name and looked at me with their eyes overflowing with sympathy, or they'd pull me aside to tell me how good of a man he was. I'm not certain exactly how old I was because my mother refused to speak of him at all unless she was drunk to hell and back. Even then, her words barely made sense. I was small enough, though, that the only thing I remember of him is the warmth of his voice and a slice of a smile. He lived in a mansion of a house, by my father's salary as a professor, but mostly by my mother's trust fund. My parents had been planning on filling it up with a whole host of children, but with just my mother and I, all the empty space was terrifying. I had nightmares as a teenager about walking into the abandoned corridors of my house and never finding my way back to that small pocket of rooms that we maintained as our living space. My father was a professor, one of architecture at a prestigious university. The sort of school that everyone recognizes by name, and he drove an hour to work every day and an hour home. My mother and his friends tried to convince him to move to the city, but he said that he preferred the slowness and solitude of a more rural life. He was kind to a fault. Always ready with a joke. In a crisis, he always knew what to do. I know this because in the years after his disappearance, I would regularly get accosted by strangers and held captive while they told me long-winded stories about him. I left as soon as I could. 17 years old. I didn't go back for 2 decades. But my mother died last month of a heart attack, and as their only child, the duty fell on me to clear out the house. My mother had forbidden me from going into his office. She kept it intact, sealed like a shrine to him, out of some sort of morbid respect. I left it for last. The light didn't work, so I opened the curtains, covering the floor-to-ceiling windows and one wall, coughing at the explosion of dust, and worked by the light of the sun. There was so much of him in that room, and the way that he decorated, and the neat, loopy annotations filling many of his books. His desk was an oak behemoth, the weight of it wearing holes into the carpet, so I didn't want to deal with it until the smaller items had been packed up. When I finally got around to the desk, I was surprised to find that the drawers were mostly empty. The only thing inside them was a stack of letters shoved off in a corner. They were addressed to Caleb Hawthorne, my father's closest friend, and a fellow professor of architecture at a different college. According to one of my neighbors, an older woman who couldn't shut up to save her life, my father had enjoyed the charm of written communication, even though he and everyone that he knew had easy access to phones. The paper was yellowed with age. It felt brittle when I picked it up. I've transcribed their content below. The letters appear to have been sent back to my father after arriving at their destination. September 2nd, 1995. Dear Caleb, I must admit it's a surprise to hear from you so soon. I assume you'd be kept busy by your new son for a couple of months at least. I remember the days of having a newborn, and I truly do not miss it. Still, I wish the best to you and your wife, and hope that the sleep deprivation has not yet stolen your wits. When we last spoke, your neurons were already struggling. I'd hate for you to lose the remaining few. As always, please remember that if you need me, I can be there within a day. Once you've settled in, my family would love to come see you. My son's been asking about his Uncle Caleb. We could plan for Christmas, perhaps. As to your inquiries about my happiness at my university, rest assured that I am very pleased with my current job, and if you wish to claim me for your own architectural department, you will have to try much harder than that. There's something I would like to get your advice on, however. It concerns one of my students by the name of James Bellsmith. He is by far one of the most promising students that I've encountered, and although this is the first year that I have taught him, my colleagues have only spoken positively about him. As you know, my class is mostly focused on practical design. My students apply the concepts they've learned in other classes and make blueprints for buildings that are both structurally sound and visually interesting. It's bad for a professor to show favoritism, of course, but I was excited to review Mr. Bellsmith's first project. I had heard so much about his capabilities and seen his intellect firsthand in the thoughtful responses that he gave to my questions, even if he was a bit spacey. He turned in his blueprints very early, barely 3 weeks after I first explained the assignment. It was the first to end up on my desk, and although I usually wait for all the projects to be turned in and grade them all at once, I didn't want to wait. He turned in a blueprint for an observatory. It was an unusual choice for a first project, but on first glance, he seemed to have done exceptional work. It was mostly of one vast room with a recessed space for an impressive telescope and a domed roof that could open or close easily. A ring of smaller rooms arced around the circular walls, and Mr. Bellsmith indicated they'd be used to give presentations, contain various informational artifacts, and books about space, and store small telescopes. He provided detailed information about the mechanism that would open the roof, as well as the stained glass windows that would be in each of the outer rooms. Have you ever seen those illusion pictures made up of dozens of circular lines that make it look like the image is moving? I was obsessed with those as a kid, and I had a couple of books of them. I thought it was magic, and nothing could convince me otherwise. Even when my mother took my book and tore it in half to show me that it really was just paper. Mr. Bellsmith's blueprints reminded me of that. The more I looked at it, the more I became convinced that it was wriggling on the page, like maggots caught in a fishhook. The lines squirming ever so slightly out of place. The dimensions looked off. I checked over his math twice, and it was factually correct, but I couldn't shake the impression that the observatory was somehow too large for itself. It physically hurt to look at. It made my eyes ache and my head pulse with pain. I know that doesn't make any sense. I know how it sounds. When I told my wife about it, she put her hand on my forehead and asked if I was feeling unwell. I called him into my office to discuss the project, once I had had time to calm down. He was smirking the whole time that we talked, sunk into his chair without a care in the world. I put the blueprint down in front of him and demanded answers, with probably not as much professionalism as I should have employed. He looked down at it in confusion. He asked me what the hell I was talking about. There was no remaining sign of the unsettling creation that it had been before. It was just a regular, if very technical, proficient diagram. But I swear to you, Caleb, that observatory was straining at the seams of its blueprint, bloating in the way of dead animals filled with gas. I'm asking you, please, to pay heed to our long friendship and trust me when I say that there was something truly wrong. November 15th, 1995. Dear Caleb, alright, I get it. You don't believe me. You didn't have to be so cruel about it. The president of my university agrees with you, by the way. He got all pitying and asked if I needed a vacation. I took it, obviously. because I'm not good to turn down free time off, and my students didn't really need me for the next few weeks. They've been working on their next project, and I'm hoping that Bellsmith will settle down without me there to terrorize. Have you ever had a student that hates you? No, I don't mean they dislike you, your teaching style, or think that you give too much work, or don't like how stern you can be. I mean, they really hate you. They want you to be dead, and they would do it themselves if they could. You wake up in the middle of the night to a sound coming from down the stairs, and you're frozen with fear that they finally come for you, and even your wife, sleeping peacefully beside you, she isn't safe. I think Bellsmith hates me like that. Sometimes when he looks at me, there's so much fury in his eyes that it seems like he'd burn the whole country down if it meant that I went with it. And my wife thinks I'm being ridiculous. And maybe I am. I don't know anymore. He turned in 2 more blueprints. They didn't have the same horrible quality the first did, but they were both labyrinthian, with twisting corridors, dead ends that seemed to just appear. Both were designed to be huge, spiraling structures, one of a library, and the other of a towering apartment building. They were against every principle of good architecture. They'd be counterintuitive to navigate at best, and downright dangerous at worst, leaving someone to wander for hours without seeing any hint of an exit. The safety and building codes would be a nightmare, and I doubt they'd ever be approved to actually be built. Parts of the building stuck out at odd angles, hanging far out over the rest. Probably come crashing down at the first hint of wind. The worst part is that they were still beautiful, despite all of that. There was something undeniably compelling about them. I've been dreaming about his blueprints. I'm in his buildings every night in a different area every time, and I'm running. There's no transition between being awake and being asleep for me. I'm in my bed, and then I'm sprinting at full speed down a hallway like I've been dropped into a run that's already been happening for a very long time. I race through the labyrinth, and it never ends. There's always more ground beneath my feet, new places to go. There's something chasing me, always just a couple of steps behind. I can hear its claws scratching against the stone, hear the wheeze of its breath. Sometimes it gets so close that I can feel its cold teeth graze my back. I don't think I can do this anymore, Caleb. Is that spot in your university still open? January 23rd, 1995. You bastard. Utter fucking bastard. I'm not fucking delusional. And if you try to take my son away from me, I'll make you regret it. I run the mazes while I'm awake now. I'll blink and suddenly I'll be inside one of the blueprints with the monster inches behind. When it scratches me, I bleed, and I keep bleeding once the labyrinth fades away and I'm back at home. I know Bellsmith's address. It's quite simple to get from the university database when you know what you're doing. He lives alone, which makes it easier. I've got my gloves, my old rifle, and a mask to cover my face. This is an awful thing to admit to you, and I'm sorry for that, but I need you to know. If this goes poorly, I need you to make sure that my son is okay. Tell him that I love him. It comes down to this. I cannot allow Bellsmith to build any of his blueprints. I've seen past his smile, and he's empty inside. I'm putting this here because honestly, I've had a hell of a day at work, and I don't know what to make of the information I just received. I can't exactly say where I work, since if I happen to attract any attention, I'd probably lose my job instantly. All I can say is that I work at a space agency. The things are kept pretty locked up here since they don't want any information leaks until they're completely sure of their findings. At least that's what I'm assuming. I've been here for a while and still all I really know is what I've been assigned. I wasn't supposed to know this information. Fuck, I shouldn't have taken that phone. I mean, what am I doing? I could get fired for this. Though honestly, maybe getting fired is the least of what could happen to me. Okay, let me start with how I got a hold of the phone. My boss, I'm not really going to describe her. She's not that important to the story. She asked me to go drop off a couple of files in the processing lab. Now, the details of what it was aren't really that important, honestly, and it has nothing to do with what I'm talking about now. It was just a couple of hypotheses that she wanted to submit to see if they could actually do any research. What was important is that the processing lab is past meeting room AB, which I didn't even know was being used that day until I heard a voice from inside. I couldn't really make out what was being said. The doors muffled too much of the sound, and the recording wasn't the best, but the more I listened, the more I started to feel I recognized the voice. I couldn't put my finger on it, but then I heard the other people in the room begin to speak. No one's got to find out about this recording. It could put our next mission in jeopardy. One of the men spoke. I couldn't really recognize his voice, but I assumed it was probably someone that I was meant to know. Someone replay it. There was a sound towards the end over their voice that I want to hear again. The woman said. And then the sound of the recording was heard again. That was when I recognized whose voice it was. And then my heart stopped. Now, I have to admit something here that could probably get me into trouble, but you know what? To hell with it. There's a fire alarm in a stairwell, and I know for a fact that there aren't any cameras in that area of the stairwell. At that point, I didn't really think. I just had to get my hands on that recording to find out what was happening, so I hit the fire alarm. I mean, even if I get fired, it could be worth it. People were leaving the building in a panic since this hadn't been scheduled, and no one noticed me slipping into the meeting room. Even the people that were already in there. I grabbed what was on the table. It was a pretty badly damaged phone, and I tucked it into my pocket, making sure no one else saw me. Quickly, I joined everyone else leaving the building, making light conversation and acting confused, to fit in with the crowd. During all the chaos, I slipped away to my car and put the phone in the storage compartment, locking the door and slipping back into the crowd. I would have left immediately, but I knew that if I left immediately after the phone went missing, I'd be the number one suspect. When everything had been sorted out, obviously, there was a whole commotion as they realized the phone was missing and everyone was searched. Eventually, they couldn't keep us all there for too long, and they let us go one by one after searching us. Thankfully, I hadn't bothered checking our cars. I don't think they think anyone had the time to get to their cars. It's a damn stroke of luck as well, because if they had checked... Let's just move on. As soon as I got home, I let my mom and dad know that I had some work left to do, and that I'd be up late, so they probably shouldn't bother me. I mean, this was common enough, so they wouldn't bother me. When I got to my room, I closed the door, and I know you're probably wondering why I didn't just lock it. Well, I come from an Indian household, so if I were to lock the door, my mom and dad would immediately suspect something was up. My sibling wouldn't suspect anything, but she'd probably be concerned, and I really didn't want to get any of them involved in this mess. Well, I unlocked the phone quickly, bypassed the password, navigated to the voice recording app, and of course, there were 2 files, ones that were unlabeled. The rest of them seemed to be the names of popular songs, which, after a quick listen, revealed that it was the same voice from the recording singing for fun. I knew that we had a charger that worked with this type of phone and connected to my laptop, transferring the files. As soon as it had downloaded, I grabbed the phone and hid it on my desk. As soon as I listened to the file, I'd make sure to get rid of it. I mean, no point trying to return it. I'd get caught either way. And now for another explanation. I've tried to link the files here multiple times, but for some reason it refuses to upload. I've tried multiple times since destroying the phone, and nothing seems to work. At this point, I just needed to get this off my chest, and I don't want to have anything to do with this anymore. I've decided to just transcribe them here as I listen to them, so here goes nothing. It's been almost a week since they selected me to be the first solo adventurer to go into space. The more I think about it, the stranger the situation feels. I mean, I know they've been prepping me to do this for years. They've been prepping all of us in the training room, which is what kind of weirds me out. You think they'd do some testing, select the people that are the most probable choices, and focus on them to be on the mission, but no, they trained all of us and then chose me. Although I can't lie and say that I'm not giddy about it, I've always wanted to be an astronomer. Or more, I've always wanted to go to space. The fact that I'm even here I'm grateful for. And even more that I was chosen to be able to be the first solo explorer. I remember that I fell asleep in the meeting room. It was strange. Some sort of weird haze that just made me feel absolutely exhausted. I just thought that it might have been my thalassemia or anemia causing me to feel tired again. So I drank some water, but it didn't make me feel any better. Eventually I fell asleep, but now, thinking back on it, it really did feel different. It felt off. When I woke up, it was evening time and someone was shaking me awake. Karina, a girl who was in training with me, had a smile on her face. "Hey, don't tell me Madam Chosen One is sleep-deprived right before the big day," she asked me teasingly. Karina and I always had a thing. It wasn't quite a romantic or sexual thing, but it certainly wasn't just friendship. We were kind of somewhere in between, and we were both fine with it, but it had made training a lot more enjoyable to have someone like that for me. No, I'm fine, Rena. Did I miss something? I asked, rubbing my eyes. I honestly just passed the fuck out. I don't even know how. It's cool, Madam Shit. I forgot. Is it okay if I call you that today? Would you prefer something more androgynous? She said worryingly, handing me a bottle of water. She always worried about things like that. It's adorable. It's fine, I responded, smiling and drinking from the bottle. It was only then that I noticed someone in the training room was simply just hanging out and talking. Did the meeting end? Karina laughed before telling me, "Oh, it ended a while back, but it didn't really apply to you. Honestly, I don't know why you even came. It was meant for all of us except for you, Madam Chosen One." I rolled my eyes. "You can stop calling me that now, or the novelty will wear off. Anyway, are you going to keep being cute, or are you going to fill me in?" I teased her. She simply sat on the table next to where I was sitting on the chair. "They were just telling us that since you were being chosen for the program, we're all being let go. This will be our last day here since you'll be sent off at, dawn tomorrow?" She began to explain. I nodded, and she continued. "It wasn't anything major, really, just that they appreciated us volunteering for this program, and that the time we sacrificed will be compensated in money." I frowned. "That's it? They're just letting you all go?" I asked. I'm sorry, Karina. I know everyone here wanted this opportunity as much as I did. For them to just let you all go." She shook her head. Hey, no need for apologies. We all knew what we signed up for, and only one of us would be selected. Besides, all of us kind of agreed that if anyone should go up, it should be you." She smiled, patting my head comfortingly. I was hesitant, but I ended up saying, "You say so." "Hey, Chosen One, heads up!" One of the guys in my training group, Matt, stood up and tossed something at me, which flew gently, heading right for my face. I ducked out of the way and looked behind me to see it was a paper airplane. "Oh, you're on," I grinned, grabbing a piece of paper and setting out to make the best fucking paper airplane in my life. Things devolved from there. With the 9 other people in the room, including Karina, making their own paper airplanes and beginning to throw them at each other. It was really nice. The room was bathed in golden sunset hues, and there was so much laughter, and honestly, with how competitive we were to get the spot, it was surprising that we were all getting around so well. All right, settle down, everyone, a familiar voice called out, and we all turned to see Bruce in the doorway. Bruce was a big man, mostly muscled, but he had a kind face. Don't let that fool you, though. He was a strict trainer when we were in the program, but he was fair. He was a good guy. Now, where's our lucky trainee? I raised my hand, raising my eyebrows. Here, sir. Anything you need? I asked. His face broke into a smile. I come bearing gifts, or single gift for now, he said, and opened the door a bit wider for a familiar person to peek inside. Hey, oh my God! A huge smile stretched across my face. It's been a while! Get over here! I opened my eyes and my younger sibling ran over, crashing into me. Being at the training program meant that I didn't get to see any visitors, and my sibling had been so busy recently that I hadn't seen her in a while. I guess that, and the combination of knowing that I would be gone away for a while, made me a bit emotional. Hi, she said, hugging me. Can't believe you're gonna go into space, she grinned. I shook my head. Honestly, I can't believe it either. This has been my dream since I was 5, but what are you doing here? How did you even know I was here? I thought this was meant to be a secret. My sister cut me off. I've actually been working here for a while now. I didn't know that you were working here either. I only found out when you were chosen. We decided to keep it a secret so I could come in and surprise you today, she said while smiling. Honestly, after that, my conversation felt a bit like a blur. Everything blended together. I know I was having fun with my sister and my friends. The more I think about it, though, the more I feel like something was wrong with it. And now I think I know. It all felt staged. I don't know how to explain it, but it felt too perfect. It might sound stupid, but I've never been someone who has perfect luck. There was almost never a situation when everything felt completely right. All of this was my ideal situation. All of the trainees getting along, the picturesque setting, my sister being here, all of it was what I'd prayed to have before I left. But maybe I'm just saying that I felt something was wrong because of what I know now. Before I knew it, I was being ushered into another room, a cafeteria. There was all my favorite foods. There was a cake. It was a farewell party, I think. Honestly, the more I think about it, the more I realize that there were certainly more people than I actually knew. Maybe other employees. But even then, why would they be at my party? At the time, I didn't care. I was having so much fun. People were congratulating me, shaking my hand, hugging me, kissing me on the cheek. I think I really should have recognized something was wrong by then. I've never been one to let people other than extremely close friends and family be physically affectionate with me. It just wasn't something that I was comfortable with. And the fact that I was letting people do that and get so close to me without ever feeling even the slightest bit worried or anxious or uncomfortable should have been a clear indicator that something wasn't right. But it wasn't, and now I'm here. The party went on for a while, and the sun had already set by the time things began to die down. It was just me, my sister, Karina, and Bruce. Everyone else had left. So, chosen one, feeling confident? Bruce asked, eating a piece of cake. Still nervous as hell, obviously, Bruce. I have anxiety, remember? I said, glaring at him. Anyways, what's with the whole chosen one thing? Is that a nickname or a joke everyone came up with? Seems like everyone got the idea, I asked. Karina laughed, drinking water from her cup. Don't be anxious, darling. You're going to do wonders. You were born for this, you know, she said, sipping it. My sister was strangely quiet at this point. I knew sometimes she would get quiet, but she'd been quiet for almost 3 minutes now, and I was starting to get freaked out. Hey, are you okay? I asked her. She turned to me, her expression blank and confused. What? Where am I? What's going on? She asked us. We are at my going away party. Are you all right? I asked, confused. Karina made a small noise of concern. Here, maybe you're tired. How about you get a drink of water and take a nap, We'll wake you and Madam Chosen One here has to go, she said, handing my sister her cup of water. Here, waterful from this. My sister nodded and drank some of the water, and I wiggled my fingers, reaching for the cup. Come on, I'm thirsty as well. Oh, thirsty, Karina teased. I'm sitting right here, madam, she said while grinning. Don't start, Rena, I rolled my eyes. You know that's not what I mean, as cute as you are, I responded, nudging her with my shoulders and taking the cup from my sister and drinking from it. Feeling better? I asked my sister. A little bit, she said. Bruce sighed. You really should probably get some rest. You seem like you're tired. Maybe you can go home, come see your sibling off tomorrow morning. My sister shook her head. No, I'm fine. I'd feel really bad if I let my sibling go off to space without spending at least some time with her as I can. Bruce nodded understandingly. I understand, but I just need to remind you, she needs to be put into the quarantine area at 8 p.m. So that she's all set to go for the mission tomorrow. The Chosen One needs her sleep, of course. Yeah, I get it. It's already 7:30, I said, looking at the clock. By the way, where is this quarantine area? At this, Bruce grinned. Glad you asked, Cadet. Come on. It's about time that we get you up there. I'm sure something should be ready by now. Now, if you asked me exactly how we got to the spiral staircase tower, I wouldn't be able to tell you. I have no idea how Bruce took us there. I have no memory of the area around us. Everything looked familiar, and yet I have no firm memory of where we went. All I remember was getting into the tower, which was lit with blue lights, and had a spiral staircase. As I stepped inside, I heard the sound of party horns and confetti fell down. The other trainees were standing towards the upper part of the staircase, holding confetti poppers and party horns in their hands as they grinned. You guys, I yelled up at them, a grin on my face as I held back the tears. This is so sweet. Yeah, Chosen One. Now get up here, take your walk of victory. Or your climb of victory, I guess, Matt called out, teasing me. I rolled my eyes. I thought I told you guys to stop calling me Chosen One, Matt, I called back. It makes me feel weird as fuck. As I climbed up, my sister Karina and Bruce were behind me, watching and smiling as I high-fived some of the trainees, hugged some of the others, and had small conversations. Then I started taking too long. Bruce put a hand on my shoulder. Hey, as much as I don't want you to rush, it's 7:45. I think you're probably going to want to get to the top of the stairs, he said to me. I took his word for it and climbed the last few stairs, and instantly, I felt the tears build up in my eyes. Mom? Dad? Of course, I called them what I called them in my native tongue, but for the sake of anyone who finds this and listens to this, I'll just keep everything in English. I ran over to them and I hugged them. If there was something that people knew about me, it was how much I loved my family. My sister joined in the hug and my mom leaned back. We're so proud of you. All your aunts and uncles and grandparents and cousins. We're all so proud of you for bringing honor to our family. You're going to be a part of history tomorrow. I nodded. Yeah, really excited. I'm going to miss you guys so much. I'm going to miss everyone, I said. As I said that, though, something began to feel strange to me. Something about this. All of this. I couldn't put into words, but it just felt weird. Why was I even doing this? Putting her hand on my shoulder. Yeah, I'm fine. Just getting emotional, I think, I said, trying not to cry as I laughed. I drank some water and took a deep breath. I'm all right. I'm so happy to have this opportunity. I won't let you down, Mom and Dad. I'll do what I have to do to make history, and then I'll come home and we can celebrate, I said, hugging my parents once again. We know you will. You've gotten this far, haven't you? My dad said. This is what you've always wanted, to go to space. So now it's time to make your dreams come true. I nodded, and Bruce cleared his throat, almost sounding like he was holding back tears. Well, I hate to break up the moment. But our chosen one here has to get inside for quarantining so that she's all set to go for the mission tomorrow. Cadet, it's time for you to say your goodbyes. I turned back to my parents. I hugged them tightly, my tears falling. Goodbye, Mom and Dad. I'll be back home soon. Promise, I said to them. Then I turned to my sister and hugged her tightly. Be good, okay? Do well in college. Do well in your job. Be good to Mom and Dad. Don't do anything I wouldn't do, okay? I said. When I pulled away, she was crying. Be careful and stay alive and don't do anything stupid and get yourself blown up, she said tearily, sniffling. That's what the training is for, kid. I grinned, trying to hold back tears of my own. Hugging my family once more, tightly, I couldn't help but feel something was very wrong. Did I really want to go on this mission and leave my family behind? But before I could say anything, they were already waving goodbye and heading down the stairs. Maybe I did want this. With that, I turned to Karina. So it's been a fun ride, hasn't it? Been together through all of this, I chuckled, looking at her through tears. She stepped forward and took my hands in hers. Even though she was the taller of the two of us, I was the one who could carry her easily, even in 5-inch heels. Her hands were gentle. It has. And I hate that it has to end, she told me softly. I laughed a little then, reaching forward to tuck a piece of her hair behind her ear. Who says it has to? I'm gonna come back for you, darling. As long as you don't forget me, I said, raising an eyebrow. Forget you? You're so silly. If anything, I'm hoping you don't forget me, oh chosen one, she said, with a mocking vow. And she kissed my hand. I rolled my eyes, again with the... You know what? Forget it. I'll be back for you. You're just as important to me as my family, and you know how important my family is to me, I said to her. She laughed at that. Okay, firstly, nothing is as important to you as your family, so that obviously isn't true, but... She stepped closer to me as she continued. I'd like to think I'm a close second. Yeah, you are, I said. And my voice was a bit breathy. This girl's really too sweet. She stepped a bit closer to me now, and there was barely any room between us. I know you don't really do the whole romance thing, but She began to say nervously, and I just smiled and wrapped my arms around her waist. A hug would be nice. You know? For good luck, I said to her, offering her the chance she seemed to be asking for. She rolled her eyes and hugged me tightly. And as she pulled back, she whispered, Good luck, chosen one. I'll see you tomorrow morning. And with that, she slipped away from me and down the stairs. Finally, I turned to Bruce, who gave me a sympathetic smile. It's time for you to head inside, Cadet, he said, pointing to the huge, open metal door. Huh? I realized now that I hadn't even noticed when it had opened at the time. Thanks, Bruce. You really did take care of me and train me to be the best cadet I could be. I'm glad I got you as my trainer. You feel totally prepared for space, I said playfully, elbowing him. I sure hope so, chosen one. We're all depending on you, he said, and there was an underlying seriousness to his voice. As I stepped into the room and turned around, waiting for the doors to close. Goodbye, chosen one. I turned to look back. My heart rate spiked as I saw him waving at me with a strange, pleasant smile. It was off. The door closed, and I think that was the moment I knew something was completely wrong. As the door locked in place, I couldn't convince myself that the weird, sudden lack of emotion on Bruce's face as he closed that door and said goodbye was just my imagination. Walking up to the door, I tried the handle to find that it was locked, No keyhole, no password. Nothing. I had been locked in. As I explored the room, I was thankful for the fact that it was large. Seeing as if it was small and cramped, I certainly would have lost my mind. I was also very glad I brought my bag because it seemed like the only entertaining thing in the room was the glass dome ceiling, showing the night sky in all its glory. To be fair, it was very entertaining to me, but with all the nervous energy I had, it certainly wasn't going to help me calm down. As I checked my phone, I realized with a sinking feeling that I had no signal in here. Great. Trapped in a huge, empty room, all alone, with nothing to do but stare at the stars. I hadn't even brought food with me, honestly. Or water, come to think of it. I hadn't even seen anywhere to sleep. On cue, my eyes landed on a lump that I recognized to be a sleeping bag. Seeing as I had nothing else to do, I set up the sleeping bag and just stared up into space. It was beautiful. Especially since this facility was located away from the lights of the city. The stars could be seen much better here. So much that you could even see galaxies with your naked eye. I always loved staring up at space, losing myself in its beauty. Eventually, though, around 11 p.m., I started to feel very strange. As I went over the day's events in my head, I started to feel off about them, the way I mentioned earlier. Everything felt rehearsed, scripted, almost like a play to make me happy, to make the chosen one happy. I think this was when it truly occurred to me to question how strange it was that everyone seemed to be calling me the chosen one. I mean, it was funny as a joke, but now, the more I began to think about it, the creepier it felt. Karina had called me that. Bruce had called me that. Matt had called me that. Even my own mom and dad called me that. And if that wasn't fucked up, Mom and Dad. I sat up. What Karina had said had been right. I mean, I loved my family more than anything, more than myself. So in that logic, why the hell would I have agreed to go to space and come back at God knows when? I didn't even know when I was returning. That was when the piece began to click. There was a knock on the door, and out of curiosity, I walked over and whispered, "Hello? Ari?" It was the first time I'd heard anyone say my name all day. "Ari, can you hear me?" The voice called quietly through the door. "Karina?" I asked in surprise. We already said goodbye. What are you? She cut me off. "Don't drink the water." I blinked and was filled with even more confusion. "What?" I asked. "The water," she repeated. "Don't drink the water. That's what they're using to make us all quiet and obedient. If you drink it, you'll do whatever they want you to do. Ari, you cannot drink the water or else you'll go to space. You'll do what they want you to do." I was completely lost now. Karina, you said you were happy that I was going, that I was meant to go, that I was the chosen one, I started saying. No, that wasn't me. I don't want you to go, Ari. I want you to stay here. Not just because I love you, but because if you go, you might not come back, Karina said, her voice shaking. "Karina, slow down. Tell me everything," I said seriously, genuinely scared by now. She made a frustrated sound. "I don't have time. If they find out I'm not in my room anymore, they're going to get me again, and they make me drink the goddamn water," she yelled. "What does the water do?" I asked, trying to get some answers out of her. I don't know exactly what it does, Ari. Apparently it makes us want to send you into space on your own with no backup, randomly selected. Doesn't it seem weird to you? She asked. And I had to admit, as the haze was starting to fade from my mind, she was right. Like I said at the beginning of this recording, why would they randomly select one of us to go into space? They didn't even tell us who was the best in training. They just suddenly said that I was the chosen one. And I realized something at that moment. Karina, I don't think I want to go to space. I don't know if I ever did, and you know how much I love my family. Why would I want to leave them and go into space and come back at some unspecified time? Hell, they haven't even told me a return date. I was starting to yell, my panic taking over. It's because they never intended for you to come back, Ari. Karina responded, just as panicked. Think about it. What was the first thing they did when they offered you this position to work here? You didn't apply to be a part of this training program, did you? Slowly, I shook my head, but realized she couldn't see me. I spoke. No, I applied to just be a researcher here. I never wanted to leave Earth, and during my interview, they offered you a glass of water, didn't they? And they told you not to tell anyone what your actual job is, right? Karina asked. Right, I whispered. Listen, I don't have much time. I don't know what's going on, but promise me, do not drink any water that is here. When they let you out in the morning, do whatever you can to fight your way out. You need to get out of here, please, she pleaded to me. At this point, I was completely ready to listen to her, but what about you? I asked. I can't just leave you here. I'll be fine. I promise you, I can get out of here much easier than you can. Just swear to me. Fuck, someone's coming. Don't drink the fucking water. Okay, just don't. She began to say desperately, but was cut off. The breath. And then there was silence. Karina? I called out. Karina, can you hear me? I tried again. No response. I ended up accepting that Karina was gone after waiting to hear her again for 5 minutes and getting no response at all. Not even the sound of anyone breathing. She had been right, though. During my interview, they did give me water. Throughout the whole training program, they'd always provided us with food and water. Not stuff that we brought in, but their own food and their own water, and it was true. So much of today had felt strangely perfect, like not a single bad thing was happening. It was all too picturesque, like a strange play, and throughout the whole day, I'd seen Karina drinking water. I had drunk water. And then it hit me, my little sister. She tended to carry around her own water bottle more than anything, and towards the end of the party, she had been acting strange, as though she had no idea what was going on. If she hadn't drank so much of the water, maybe whatever effect it had on her had worn off. Then when Karina had given her water from her cup, it might have brought on the effect again. I took a deep breath. All I had to do was not drink the water from the water dispenser in the room, right? I mean, that couldn't be too hard. I laid down in the middle of the room in the sleeping bag. At least I could look up at the night sky to keep me company. Calm my nerves a bit. Ever since I was a little kid, I've always loved space. But back then, I really wanted to go into space, but now, with the life I have back home and the people I have on Earth, I don't think I want to go anymore. I was about 2 hours into laying there that I started to feel something was very, very, very wrong. My heart dropped and my heart rate quickened. It was almost like I was having a panic attack, but it couldn't have been one, seeing as there was no trigger. I was all alone in this room with nothing else, no one else. There was nothing that could have triggered the panic attack. I couldn't even tell what was happening. It took me too long to realize what was wrong. Looking up at the sky, I felt this deep, unending, terrible fear. This horrible emptiness inside of me. I don't know how to explain it because of this feeling. God, I wanted to rip my skin off, tear my hair out, do anything to feel something other than what I can only describe as nothingness. And when I looked up at the sky, there was nothing. And it's not like the stars disappeared or anything. The sky looked exactly the same, but I could feel it. And I'm not fucking going crazy. I know I'm not. I could feel how empty it was, how nothing it was. And it was alive. And I could feel it. It was out there, and I could feel it slowly making its way through my body, through my blood, and it was all this cold, dark nothing. It's 3 a.m. now. I can feel the nothing looking at me, calling me. It's already claimed me. I'm the chosen one. I understand. It's not even trying to get closer. I'm not worried. It can't feel anything except for hunger. It already knows that I'll be there soon. I'm so thirsty. And that's why I'm recording this now. I know I'll end up drinking the water eventually. I can't hold out for another 3 hours. At least if I record this, someone can find the phone and will have a record of me. I can feel the nothing. I don't want to feel the nothing. At least when I drink the water, I can't feel it anymore. First audio recording ends. I have a lot to say about this, but I think that it would probably be better for me to explain everything after the second recording. It's a lot shorter than the first, so here goes. I don't know how long I've been up here. Everything's a blur. I don't even know how I got here, which is quite concerning, seeing as I was the one who had to initiate the liftoff on the ship. All I remember is them bringing me out of the room, strapping me into the space shuttle, and then everyone waving goodbye and smiling. They were all smiling the same smile, waving exactly the same. My sister wasn't there to send me off. Karina was. I guess they got to her last night after she tried to warn me. I put together most of the pieces. I think it's just a shame it took me so long. The nothing, it's stronger here. It's not just in my blood, in my lungs, sliding through me anymore. It's enveloping up here. It makes you feel nothing but cold, void, emptiness, the nothingness. I'm sure of it. The nothing is alive. I can feel it moving, crawling closer. It's not in a hurry. It knows it will reach me soon enough. I'm going to try to explain it, but I don't think I can actually put it into words what this thing is. Or what it isn't, I suppose, but I'll try, nonetheless. We humans only know about a small portion of the universe. It's a known fact. There's so many things out there that we don't know, that we don't understand. I think that's what makes this so hard to explain. I don't understand it. It doesn't make sense. But there's something out there that's simply nothing. It's not there, but it is there. It's a void in existence, something made of nothing, and it takes until there's nothing left to take, and it'll keep taking until the end of time. There's no beginning to it. There's no end. It's nothing, and yet it's everything. And it's so hungry. And I'm very, very interesting to it. A human that's not inside the confines of the planet Earth? It's intrigued once again. It's quite funny to me, really, now that I think about it. We humans all repeat history all the time, even when we think we're better than that. The number of times humans have sacrificed each other to please some higher being or higher order is uncountable. And yet, how many times has that actually saved us? It didn't take me too long to realize that the Chosen One was practically synonymous with The sacrifice. They set me up here to try and appease the nothing, to give it an offering. I'm sure this isn't the first time. Do you know what the funniest part is? That this won't do anything to stop the inevitable. The nothing never asked for sacrifices or offerings. It doesn't need to ask for anything. It just takes. But it will take me and it will devour me. And it'll leave nothing left of me. And it won't stop it from coming closer and closer to Earth. I can feel it waiting. It's biding its time. There's no rush. It'll devour us all soon. And we'll all become nothing. It's here now. I can feel it. I'll spare you having to hear my end, I suppose. This is my goodbye. Hopefully this ship makes it back to Earth somehow. I'm sure it will. But nothing wants only me. If I've learned anything, it's that there's nothing in space, and the nothing is always here waiting. It'll come to take me, and it'll come to take you as well. Second recording ends. I need to take a minute. Okay, I stepped away for a couple of hours to process this, but there's a couple of things in these recordings that I have to address, right? Firstly, at the end of the second recording, the audio starts distorting a bit. I don't know what could cause that sort of distortion, but I swear I can hear something under the person's voice. I can't even describe that sound. Now, I'm willing to write that off as simply an issue with the phone itself, or some kind of interference, maybe. But here are the undeniable facts. As I mentioned before, I have to get my hands on this recording because I recognize this person's voice. I'm sure people have somewhat put together what was going on, so you can understand why I may be concerned. The person speaking in those audios is my older sister. I can completely confirm that, especially since I grabbed her phone to check if it was the same phone. Same password, same apps, same wallpaper, same social media. Everything is exactly the same. The only difference is that the two recordings I listened to now were not on my sister's current phone. Let me explain. I referred to my sibling as her earlier and sister just now. My sibling is non-binary, switches between feminine and neutral pronouns. Of course, there's the truth of the fact that my older sibling's code name in the agency is Ari. I'll refer to her by that name. I know that Ari is very, very close with someone named Karina. I know that Ari has been undergoing special training in the same space agency where I work. In fact, I know that she was selected for a very special assignment, and I found that out yesterday. I didn't actually know what she did at work until just now. Ari's been home often, and when she is, she doesn't talk about work. What bothers me is that somehow this recording seems to know that I had made a plan to surprise my sibling the next week, the day before she went on her mission. I had worked on this plan with her supervisor, Bruce. I've been hearing people talking about the Chosen One a lot recently, and now here's what's really concerning me. If what the Ari in the recording said was right, then there's something wrong with the water. Now, I know that Ari drinks a lot of water during the day, and she often forgets to take her water bottle. She's been acting quite strange the last time that she's been at home. I don't tend to drink the water much in general, and I almost always carry my water bottle on me. The fact that Ari in the recording even got that little detail right, it bothers me. And I know that I've seen shipments of water bottles come to the company, and I know those are not any companies that mainly sell water, if they do sell water at all. Every time I interacted with a higher up in the agency in a meeting or something, I was offered water. Every time I talked to Bruce, I was offered a cup of water, and my water bottle was suddenly missing. But if what this recording says is true, And how did I get a recording of something that should be happening in 6 days? You know what? I don't think that matters right now. I doubt this is a prank. Seeing as some of the most important people in this agency were in that room, they mentioned that it could impact the mission next week. I might be able to admit that my sibling maybe could have lost her mind talking about this nothing entity. But if there is any piece where time could be warped, it would be in space, wouldn't it? I'd have to do something. I can't let my sibling die. I need to warn her. I need to go convince my sibling of what's happening, and then I need to destroy that goddamn phone. I believe the idea of my sister being a sacrifice over this agency just randomly sending a solo explorer into space with minimal training and no pushback. And I know my sibling decided she never wanted to go to space back when she was 14, so now that I truly think about it, something here is very wrong. My sibling wouldn't have agreed to this. I'm going to listen to the recording again. I'm just putting this out here so people know this is happening. Believe me or not, I don't care. But I'm not going to let my older sister die in space. Whether it's to losing her own mind or... There's nothing in space. There should be nothing in space. But I'm not sure what I believe anymore. I hate the summer house. That's a weird thing to say, I know, but it's true. We would stay there for at least a week every year, and sometimes we would even go up there for holidays. One year we spent Christmas up at the cabin, and that was a miserable time indeed. The cabin, my family's summer home, sat on the edge of Lake Erie and was a modest 2-bedroom cabin with a loft up in the eaves. It had a little kitchen, a nice living room with a fireplace, and 2 bedrooms downstairs. One for my 2 sisters and one for me. Mom and Dad always slept in the loft, so they never saw any of the weirdness that I saw from my bed in the smaller of the 2 bedrooms. The floor of the cabin had these wide gaps beneath the floorboards, and it let you see the underside of the cabin. Dad always promised that he would replace the floorboards, but he never did. They were old wood, smooth, not prone to splinters, and I guess Dad thought it was worth the occasional spider or bug coming up through the floorboards. I mean, his socks didn't get hung up on poking wood. Bugs, spiders, other kinds of pests, they were the least of my concerns. I didn't notice it right away, of course. The first time we stayed there, I was just amazed by the cabin. It was so cool, having a cabin all to ourselves, and I explored every room and every inch before going outside. We swam in the lake, we took our canoes out, I climbed trees, played pretend for hours, and after dinner, I fell into a deep sleep. Not even sure that I dreamed that first night, and I couldn't wait to do it all again the next day. As that first week went on, however, I started to notice the strange noises that wafted up from beneath the floorboards. It sounded like something moving under there, a scuffling sound that made me think of small animals or bugs. I could sometimes catch glimpses of them between the gaps in the floorboards, but they were always too quick for me to see. Dad said it was probably just rats. A lot of these old cabins had rodents living under the floorboards. He put down traps in the kitchen, not wanting to bother them if they were just living under the house. The traps never caught anything, though, and Dad just kind of shrugged it off, as well-behaved pests. They were well-behaved for everyone, but me, it seemed. I never slept like I did the first night again, and that scuffling beneath the boards would sometimes keep me awake at night. I'd lay there, listening to them moving around, and I think to myself that they sounded way too big to be mice. If they were rats, then they were big rats. And I sometimes wondered if they would try to come up through the floorboards. We always had fun while we were there, but I would spend my nights praying I could get to sleep before the scratching noises could keep me awake. My parents bought the house when I was 4. We went there every year till I was 12. I had a lot of time to listen and a lot of time to investigate the noises, as well as a lot of time to lie awake and be scared. When I was 10, we stayed there for 2 weeks after a storm knocked the power out of the house. It knocked out the power for the whole area. The flooding caused the grid to go down. My parents decided to stay there until things returned to normal. It was miserable. And every night I just lay there listening to the scrabbling of whatever was under there. No matter how many pillows I put on my head, no matter how much I swam and ran and wore myself out, no matter what I did to fall asleep, it never did any good. The scratching and the scrabbling would always keep me awake, and after 8 nights straight of this, I had enough. It was 11 o'clock, and I growled as the scratching started again. I was tired, I was grumpy. I had had enough. I pushed myself out of bed, coming down hard on the boards, before stomping around as loud as I dared, hoping to scare them. I had been stomping around for a couple of minutes when suddenly, the noise under my feet stopped. I stood there, feeling pleased with myself as I crawled back into bed. If I had known that it would be that easy, I would have done it weeks ago. As I closed my eyes and finally dropped into something like sleep, I felt secure here for the first time since that very first night. It was short-lived. When I heard the scrabbling again, I realized it had barely been an hour. The sound was so loud it made me think that something was trying to come through the floor. I peeked over the side of the bed and I saw something pressing between the cracks. It was dark, so it was hard to tell, but through the floor cracks, I saw fingers digging up and through the holes in the wood. The fingers were dirty, the wood making them run with dark liquid as it cut them, but it kept pushing. I was frozen in fear, my 10-year-old mind not sure what to do, but as the floorboards groaned, I knew that it would get me if I didn't do something. I reached beside my bed with a shaky hand and found the baseball bat I had leaned there. I'd been practicing. Baseball tryouts would start soon, but this wasn't what I imagined I'd be using it for. I took it up, leaned down, and swung at the hand with all of my might. It didn't stop right away, but after a few more hard shots, it pulled its fingers back under the boards. They were probably broken. I mean, at least I hope they were. And as I clenched the bat, I waited for them to come back again. I sat there for a while, staring at the floor, and as I watched, something worse than a finger looked back at me. It was a single, bloodshot eye. It looked very human. It locked eyes with me, and I pulled back into bed, the bat clattering on the floor. My parents came quick when I started screaming. I tried to explain it to them. I tried to tell them what I had seen, but they just thought that I was having a nightmare. Finally, they allowed me to sleep with them in the loft, and until we went home, that was where I slept. I refused to be alone in the room, even during the day. And I wasn't bothered again that time. It wasn't the last time I saw that mad eye, though. Or the scrabbling of all those fingers. We didn't go back the next year. Dad couldn't get the time off approved or something, and when they planned a week-long trip when I was 12, I tried to get out of it. I mean, I still had nightmares sometimes about those eyes and the fingers. I didn't want to go back. I was 12. I was old enough to be by myself, and if my sister hadn't tried to do the same thing, then I think I probably would have managed it. I even promised her she could have my room. She wasn't going for it. Mom put her foot down and said none of us were staying home, and we'd all be going, and we'd all like it. I packed my bat, as well as a flashlight, and we set out for the lake house on the second week of July. I tried my best to wear myself out that first day. I swam for hours, I explored, hiked, and by the time the night fell, I was nodding off at the dinner table. I had run myself ragged. I was hoping that if I didn't antagonize them, maybe they would leave me alone. By the time it was late enough to head to bed, I fell onto the little mattress and was out before my head fully hit the pillow. I thought I had managed it. That I'd finally gotten to sleep before the scratching could start, and as I slipped off, I thought I might have finally broken the cycle. When the scratching woke me in the wee hours, I cursed and smacked my pillow as I sat up. It was louder than ever. It sounded like animal claws, like nails on a chalkboard. And as I peeked over the edge of the bed, I could see something as it moved beneath the boards. It was pushing again, thrusting its fingers between the wooden slats, and when the fingertips began coming through, I felt like I was having the nightmare all over again. It was pushing at the boards, warping them and bending them, and I felt certain that it would come through the floor at any minute. Some of the fingers were bent in odd ways, the tips looking like they might have healed after being broken, and as I took up the bat again, I prepared to give them something to heal from again. I smashed those fingers as they tried to poke free, and as the blood ran down, they pulled them back in as the eye came back to stare at me. It was bloodshot and awful, and when I hit the floorboards, it moved away. And I was left in silence. I tried to go back to sleep, but I couldn't. Every creak of the house, every rustle of the wind, every scrape of a tree branch, and every groan of the wood sounded like the scraping returning. I finally fell asleep, but it was nearly morning, and I woke up tired and groggy. I was pokey the rest of the day. My mom asked if I was feeling sick, but I assured her I was fine. I did take a nap later, though. I wanted to be on my game when it came back that night, but I got more than I bargained for. As I sat in the middle of my bed, bat in hand and fighting sleep, I began to hear a scrabbling like I had never heard before. It was as if a beast with 1,000 fingers was crawling down there, and as it moved, it dug its nails in deep. The boards began to buck and bulge, a multitude of fingers scrabbling at the wood, and when they began to poke through, there was no way that I could get them all. I swung my bat again and again, smashing fingers and breaking nails, but it was like an army was beneath the floorboards. I kept hitting them again and again, their digits snapping loudly, but the wood was starting to come up. I screamed, not for anyone, but just in general, and as they started to press up and into the room, I caught a glimpse at what was beneath. I started to scream, but it was stuck in my throat. I had thought it was rats at first. And then I thought it was a single person. But as I saw the eyes that looked up from the floor, I didn't know what to think. It was people. Naked, skeletally thin, all of them trying to come up and out of the area beneath the floor. I counted 4, then 5, then maybe a half dozen, and as they tried to pry up more boards, their numbers kept growing. How many were there under the floor? I pictured ants coming out of a hill, and the idea that many half-starved humans pressed beneath our summer cabin made my skin crawl. I heard loud footsteps coming towards my room, and suddenly the door opened and the hall light spilled in. I thought there might have been as many as a dozen. They looked up as I did, their eyes looking surprised as they saw him. I was shocked too, but my shock was twinged with hope as someone came to save me at long last. "What in the hell are you?" But Dad stopped as he saw what was there under the floor.
They saw him too, and they tried to get through the floor, but he didn't give them time. He stepped in, grabbed me, and stepped out, closing the door and pulling a chair under it from the hall. Then he woke up my sisters, took all of us to the loft, and called the police. Then he sat up there with a pistol, something I didn't even know he owned until that moment, and waited for the police to arrive or some of the people from the floor to come out. When the police finally did arrive, he came down to let them in, and then he came back up to keep us safe. That was my dad, the protector. The cops didn't find anything, but the pushed-up boards kind of helped our story. I told them how long it had been going on, what I'd heard and seen, and they searched under the house and in the nearby woods before finally giving up. They found sign under the house of something moving around down there. Even a screen on the back side of the house that had been jimmied open, but they didn't find much else. Dad didn't tell me until I was much older. But apparently, the sheriff who came out to check the scene told him a story. The lake house was so cheap enough that working stiffs like my parents could afford it, because it was the site of something terrible. The last owners had gone missing suddenly, a man, a woman, and 3 children, and none of them had ever been found again. They had searched everywhere, but found neither hide nor hair of them. The only thing they did find was pushed-up boards in the room that I now stayed in. Enough boards for a small horde to squeeze in through. My parents sold the lake house after that, and we got a timeshare in North Carolina. That was a decade ago. But I still have nightmares about the people under that cabin sometimes. So if you see a cabin for sale on Lake Erie, be very cautious and do your homework. There could be more in the foundation than just termites. Many of you hearing this may be too young to remember the exploding whale incident that occurred in Oregon in the late fall of 1970. And heck, I'm fairly certain that quite a few of you weren't even born yet, so I'll give you the basic overview. On November 9th, 1970, a 45-foot-long sperm whale washed ashore on the beach near Florence. For 3 days, it sat there, drawing spectators, local government officials alike. After the first day or so, people were warned to stay away from it. The official reasoning given was that there were concerns that certain onlookers might climb on top of the carcass and fall in addition to the putrid stench that overtook the entire beach, and the threat of the body bursting. In less than 2 days, the Oregon State Highway Division was called in to dispose of it. They consulted with the Navy and many munitions experts, and came to the conclusion that the best way to treat it would be like a boulder, and use dynamite to blow it up. And on November 12th, with local and state news watching, they did just that, using half a ton of TNT and creating one hell of an explosion which sent chunks of whale and sand over 100 feet in the air, even crushing in the roof of a nearby parked car. That's the official story, of course. It's all a load of hogwash, though. I know because I made the mistake of getting too close to it one night. Myself, Harvey. I was getting a little ahead of myself, though, so let me back it up. I was just a youngster back then, no more than 11 years old. I lived with my folks in Florence, which back then was much smaller, and in my opinion, a much nicer place to live than it is today. I was sitting in the kitchen waiting for my mother to finish making me waffles and eggs before being taken to school when my father entered. having just stepped away to receive a phone call. "What do they want, Gordon?" my mother asked, turning to face us, causing her black and white checkered apron to swirl slightly on her waist with a spatula in her hand. My father grunted as he sat back down at the table. "Darndest thing, actually. Apparently a sperm whale managed to beach itself out in the sand. They want me and a few others to go out and take a look at it before it starts causing a nuisance." Dad worked for the local government, specifically the area of maintaining the beaches and parks for both locals and tourists alike. "Can you take me over to see it?" I asked excitedly. It had been years since a whale had washed ashore here, and I wanted to finally see what my father had spoken about dealing with once or twice before. He simply shook his head. "Afraid not, kiddo," he said, tussling my hair with his hand. "This is grown-up business. A little too dangerous to have you around." He began to chow down on the eggs and bacon my mother brought to him. "Maybe next time," he finished, speaking around bites of his food. I hung my head, feeling slightly dejected as I began to eat my waffles and eggs. When I got to school, many of the kids were talking excitedly about the whale. "I heard it's huge. Black. Stinks to high heaven." Christy, one of the girls who sat next to me in math class, said to her friend in front of her. "Ew," her friend retorted, scrunching up her nose and causing both girls to break into a fit of giggles, which was fast silenced by the teacher, clearing his throat. Later, as I sat in the lunchroom, eating pizza squares and carrot sticks, my best friend Harvey came over and sat down, along with the other two in our friend group. "So, what's your dad say about the whale?" Michael asked, using the sleeve of his shirt to wipe pizza sauce from his face. I shrugged my shoulders. "All he said was it washed ashore, and it was too dangerous for me to go see it," I admitted. Harvey let out a loud belch after downing his chocolate milk, earning a huge laugh from our group, and a stern look of disapproval from the lunchroom monitor in the back. "I heard it's already attracted a huge flock of seagulls and crows around it," he said, after settling back. Gregory chimed in. "Yeah, and it's covered in slime." We all looked at him and laughed. "You really need to stop reading those dime store pulp novels from your parents' bookshelves, man," I said, then leaned in close, all of us doing the same. "I heard it has super sharp and bright white teeth. That's what my older cousin Jana said when she stopped by this morning. Her and her boyfriend had gone for a walk on the beach when they saw it." Gregory looked at him. "Wait, what was your cousin doing with her boyfriend out that early?" he asked. Harvey made a face. "Probably doing some of that gross romantic stuff," he said with a tone of disgust. Each of us scrunched up our faces in a similar manner. "That's not the point," he continued. "The point is, none of us has seen a beach whale before." He looked around at each of us, a small, sly smile beginning to etch across his face. "So what I'm thinking is, why don't we go down there after our parents go to bed and look at it? Maybe even take some pictures with it." He pointed at me. "Alan, didn't your dad just buy you that camera a few weeks ago?" I nodded my head. I mean, yeah, but..." I began, but he cut me off. "Then why don't we go make an adventure out of it? Go see it," he pressed, looking around hopefully at all of us. Michael spoke up. "I can't do it tonight, Harv. My parents are going out to dinner and leaving me with a babysitter. You know I can't sneak past Michelle if my life depended on it." Harvey let out an annoyed snort. "Fine, maybe not tonight, but what about tomorrow night?" he asked. He looked at Gregory. "What do you say, man?" he asked him. Gregory sat a little lower in his seat, trying to make himself smaller. "I don't know, man," he said quietly. "If Mom and Dad catch me sneaking out that far, I'll get grounded for life." This time, Harvey let out a disgusted sound. "You're such a little chicken shit," he spat. We all gasped at the swear. Each of us had heard our respective fathers let out the occasional curse word around us, but after I'd made the mistake of shouting "damn it" when I stubbed my toe trying to fly up the back porch steps, and was rewarded with a bar of soap in my mouth for it, none of us really ever said them again. Harvey, being the member of our group who liked to break the rules, clearly did not care. He raised his hands and shook them in a mocking way at us. "Ooh," he said, before lowering them down and looking at me. "What about you, Alan?" he asked. "You come with me tomorrow night?" He leaned in and grinned. "Or are you too much of a scaredy cat to come with me?" I felt my cheeks grow hot and glared at my friend. "I'm not a scaredy cat, and you know it," I growled defensively at him. Who was the one who went into the abandoned house last year? I continued. And who was the one who climbed into the sewer pipe after everyone else chickened out? It was me. I sat up straight, trying to sound as unaffected and tough as I could. Then come with me, Harvey said, looking at our other two friends, and show these two chickens how to become a man, instead of staying little boys. His comment earned mutters and annoyed glances his way, but he was focused on me. He knew he had me, and so did I. He knew I hated being called scaredy or baby, and I would always take the bait when he used that line. So darn gullible in retrospect. Finally, I looked him dead in the eye. Fine, I'll go with you, I said. Yes, he said, grinning like he had just walked into the Woodworth and been told by his parents that he could choose whatever he wanted for lunch, with a root beer float. So here's what we do, he said, lowering his voice to barely above a whisper. Meet me in back of your house in the alley at 11 tomorrow night. We'll bike across the bridge and to the dunes where the whale is. So bring your camera and we'll get proof that we were there. I was about to answer him when the bell rang, signaling that lunch was over. He shot me a thumbs up as he stood up, dumped his leftovers in the trash, and returned his tray. Michael and Gregory patted me on the shoulder as they passed me by. Good luck, man, they both said, leaving me to stare after them and wonder what on earth I'd just agreed to. I spent the entire rest of the afternoon until the end of school staring out the window, unable to concentrate on schoolwork. All I could focus on was what I was going to do with Harvey tomorrow night. When Mom picked me up at 3, I barely said anything to her about how my day went. Instead, I just looked out the window of her station wagon at the Suslaw River and the hulking shape of the dunes on the other side. When my father got home that evening from dinner, I ran over to him as he sat in his recliner watching television. So, what happened? I pestered him as he attempted to watch the news. He looked at me and gave me a tired smile. It's big, all right, he said, yawning slightly. It smells like 4-week-old garbage in the dump. They're unsure of how to get rid of it. And with that, he patted me on the head and went back to watching the screen. At dinner that evening, he spoke a little more about it to my mother when she asked about it. You know, it's strange, darling, he said, as he devoured the casserole that she had made. Normally this would be a local matter, but for some reason they called in the Highway Division, along with some bigwigs from the State Coast Guard, naval bases. It's stranger, because I swear I saw 1 or 2 men studying it like it was some kind of specimen in a beaker, he added, before being shushed by my mother and told to finish telling her once Little Ears, code word for me, had gone to bed. As I lay in bed that evening attempting to fall asleep and instead gazing around my room at the Clint Eastwood and Steve McQueen movie posters on my wall, I thought about what he'd said. Why would such important people want to look at a dead whale, I thought. What could possibly be so special about it? I shrugged it off, then turned to face the wall as I felt the first tendrils of sleep begin to seep into me. The next day went by in a blur. The words of my teachers and friends echoed in my head and went straight in one ear and out the other, bouncing around in my brain like a beach ball, but never sticking. When my mom brought me home, I told her I was going to play in the backyard for a little while. Go upstairs and change your clothes then, she called as I took my books upstairs. I'll whoop your sorry behind if you get grass stains all over your nice new school clothes. I did as she said, changing into a pair of jeans and a t-shirt before discreetly grabbing my father's latest present to me. A brand new Kodak Instamatic camera and a handful of flash cubes, and heading out the back door. In our backyard sat an old, rusting Ford Model T, which had belonged to my grandfather. My father always spoke about restoring it in his memory, but never seemed to find the time to. Making sure my bike was leaning against the side of it, where it couldn't be seen by my parents, I slipped into the cab and hid the camera and flash cubes beneath the seat, before stepping back out and throwing a baseball at our fence for a few hours. After dinner time, I watched a movie being shown on TV with my father in the living room. I believe it was 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, and then kissed both of them goodnight and went to bed, pretending to fall asleep. I listened, and at around 10 heard them climb the stairs and shut the door to their bedroom. I waited another 20 minutes to make sure they were asleep, then threw back the covers, revealing I still had on jeans, sneakers, and a shirt, grabbed my coat off the hook behind the door, and crept downstairs, careful not to accidentally cause the floorboards on the stairs to creak. I slipped out the back door, turning up my collar at the chilly fall night air, and breathed in deeply. I whispered at the smell of the ocean, wafting over the dunes into town. Then I crept across the backyard to the darkened shape of the truck. Reaching through the open window, I retrieved the camera and flash cubes, along with a flashlight that I had swiped from under the kitchen sink, grabbed my bicycle, and wheeled it out into the alley where Harvey was waiting. "Well, did you bring the camera?" he whispered, and I held it up where it could be seen in the yellow streetlight over our heads. He nodded, then pressed a finger to his lips and signaled for me to follow him. Hopping onto his bike and pedaling away. I hopped on my own, and after flicking on the handlebar-mounted light to guide my way, pedaled after him. The town seemed extremely eerie at night, with all the stores closed and the houses dark. It felt like biking through a ghost town. Or a nightmare, I thought, before shaking my head. The last thing I wanted to do was scare myself into turning around. Harvey would never let me live it down. We passed through intersection after intersection, always keeping an eye out for other people. And at one point, we ducked behind a fence as a police car came slowly lumbering down the road, waiting for it to pass before continuing on. Soon enough, we passed over the bridge leading out of town and towards the dunes, the air growing colder and the smell of salt water growing thicker as we approached our destination. Finally, we came to a point where we couldn't bike any further due to the sand catching our tires, and chose instead to hide our bikes amongst the far side of the first dunes, turning on both our flashlights as we let the yellow beams guide our way as we walked to the beach. "So what do you think it's going to look like?" he asked, his voice filled with obvious excitement and glee. I shrugged my shoulders before realizing he couldn't see it in the dark. "I don't know. It's been a day or two. Dad always told me that birds start eating it by now, so I think it'll have like a lot of holes in it." He let out a low whistle. "Cool," he said. "I wonder if I could stick my hand inside." I groaned. "Don't do that, Harvey. You'll never get the smell off you. Then your folks will know we've been out here." He scoffed. "Like I give a damn," he muttered. And I shook my head simply. After another 5 minutes, we both stopped. "Ugh, what's that smell?" Harvey exclaimed, covering his nose and mouth with his hand. "I guess we're close," I said through my own hand. "Man, it stinks," he said, then continued leading the way. I started following him when I accidentally walked into his back, nearly crashing to the sand. I raised my light to shine on the back of his head. "What's the deal?" I hissed, as my face throbbed with pain. But he shushed me, turning around and lowering my light. "There's someone there," he hissed back. "Kill your light." We both clicked ours off and listened. He was right. I could hear hushed voices coming from up the beach in the direction that we were heading. "Shh," I heard Harvey whisper, and then saw him crouch forward. For a moment I thought about just turning around and leaving. I didn't want to get into trouble, not when Mom and Dad are going to take me to Disneyland for Christmas vacation in a few weeks. But I couldn't just leave Harvey there by himself, so I reluctantly followed him. When I reached him, I stared out at what he was looking at over the dune. I could see the dark shape of the ocean from here. It's at less than a few hundred yards from where we lay on our stomachs. He also finally saw the whale. It lay on its side about 10 feet from the water's edge, its shape hulking and gigantic. White-lined ridges spread out the top of its back, while the rest of its shape was nothing but smooth blackness. It was easy to tell these features because currently there was a light on it, a bright one. Behind it, I could see 2 or 3 figures standing and talking amongst themselves. Then they began to walk towards us. "Down!" I whispered. Then Harvey and I made ourselves as small as possible behind the dune. The sound of footsteps digging in and kicking up sand approached, and I heard a snippet of the conversation as it passed by me. It's incredible, I heard a man say. 2 days out of the water, still maintaining vital signs. Combine this with the alterations, I think we discovered a whole new species. One far more predatory and dangerous than we've ever seen before. We gotta get on the horn and get this information out. They drew further away and their conversation dimmed and grew intangible again. The two of us stood up. What were they talking about? I asked, gazing towards the darkness where they'd gone. Who cares? Harvey said, shaking the sand off his coat and pants. I mean, we have a chance to get the pictures, come on. And with that, he began running down the last dune to the giant dark form on the sand. I followed, slower though. Something about the way that the man had spoken had made me feel a twinge of uneasiness. Still, I plodded behind my friend towards the shape. As I drew closer, it rose higher and higher above my head, until it seemed to tower over me like one of the buildings I saw when my parents took me to Portland. Harvey drew closer to the side of the creature. The smell was overpowering now, and I forced myself to breathe through my mouth to keep from gagging. He reached out towards it. Harvey, don't! I whispered urgently. Nothing's gonna happen, Alan, he said, putting a mocking tone as he said my name. It's dead after all, remember? And before I could say more, he placed his hand on it. Immediately, he drew it back, his face a look of disgust. Ew! He exclaimed. What? I asked, afraid of what he'd say. It's slimy and cold, he said, then chuckled. I don't believe it. Gregory was right. He chuckled again, then waved for me to follow him around the other side. Before I stepped after him, I noticed something odd. The birds had barely touched it. I followed after him slowly, and as I drew closer, I heard him gasp. Holy shit, Alan, come look at this. Walking quickly around to the edge and saw what he'd seen. The whale's mouth was huge. It yawned before us like the opening of a cave, its teeth looking like the stalactites and stalagmites at the entrance. It was wide enough that we could easily have walked inside. Wow, I breathed, staring into the blackness beyond. No joke, Harvey said excitedly. Looks exactly like the whale from Moby Dick. He ran away from me, down to the other end, and the tail is huge. It's as wide as a car. He called. I heard him run back towards me, and he reappeared in the light behind us. You got to take a picture of me in front of the mouth, Alan, he exclaimed. That'd be the ultimate picture to have. All the kids at school would think I'm the coolest kid there. I glanced around, looking to make sure the men weren't coming back, and pulled my camera and a flashbulb out of my coat pocket. All right, but just a few pictures, and then we get out of here, before they come back. I hooked a thumb back towards to where they'd gone. Yeah, whatever, it's fine. Just take the picture, he insisted, moving to stand towards the edge of the mouth. I looked down and pushed the flash cube into the slot at the top of the camera, then moved away about 10 feet to make sure I got as much of the whale in the shot as well as him. As I raised the viewfinder to my eye, a strange feeling came over me. It was almost the same feeling I had when I would turn to find my parents watching me out the window of the house. The feeling of being watched. But when I looked away from the camera, I saw nothing. Nobody. What are you waiting for? Harvey hissed. Take the damn picture! Shaking my head, I again raised the camera, centered the viewfinder on him, then pressed down on the shutter button. The area, for a split second, lit up even brighter by the flash of the cube and the burning smell that would come with it to follow. Take another, he insisted, bending his arm up the way bodybuilders did and striking a pose. I did as he said, but as I pressed the shutter button, something above him caught my head. High over both our heads, I could just barely see the edge of one of the whale's eyes. It was just a tiny glimpse, but something about it seemed off. As my eyes adjusted to the darkness again, Harvey picked up a piece of driftwood from the sand, then held it out like it was a spear he was about to throw. "One more," he said, chuckling as he attempted to look like Captain Ahab. I sighed, still feeling like I was being watched, but obediently raised the camera to my eye and sent it on my friend. That's when I noticed it. A flicker of motion from where I'd seen the edge of the eye. I hesitated, staring at the screen through the viewfinder, noting that there was more white than there should have been. But did the eye move? I lowered the camera. Harvey?" I said tentatively. You might want to get over here." He looked at me, annoyed. "I will," he said, raising the driftwood again, "after you take the damn picture." I was about to speak again when I heard shouting coming from off to the side. Frantic and out of breath, I turned, and I saw the 3 men who had passed us by sprinting towards us, arms waving over their heads like they were trying to signal an overhead airplane. For a second, I couldn't make out what they were saying. Then it became clear. "Get away from it! For the love of God, get away from it!" came a man's cries. "Harvey, we gotta go!" I shouted, no longer trying to be discreet. I turned and saw him drop the piece of driftwood, a panicked look covering his face. What happened next happened in a fraction of a second. One moment he was there beginning to run towards me, the next, something flashed out from inside the whale's mouth. As quick as a lightning bolt. I didn't get a good look at it, but from the little I did, it looked like a tongue. But not one I'd ever seen before. It looked like it split apart in 3 places, and as though the surface of it was covered in small, sharp hooks. And in that instant, they wrapped around Harvey with the fluidity of a boa constrictor. And then he was gone. Yanked back into the mouth and down its throat. He never even had time to cry out. And that's when the men reached me. One grabbed me around the waist and threw me as far as they could back towards the lights they had set up. I felt hard on my side, the air driven from my lungs. When I stared up, I felt the color drain from my face. The whale was moving. It was thrashing about on the sand in a frenzied attempt to reach its next meal, and it had found it. The man who had thrown me had been snagged in the clutches of its tongue, and with the same speed that it had taken my friend, yanked him back into its gullet. He, however, had managed to let out the beginnings of a scream. It was choked off as he disappeared inside. I scrambled to my feet, unable to keep myself from crying, snot running down my nose. "Run, kid!" One of the remaining 2 men shouted at me, waving at me with his arms. I took a last look at the thrashing creature on the sand and saw its eye, its diamond-patterned eye, filled with a mix of colors from black to red. The color focused and locked onto me, and I felt my pants dampen as I pissed myself in fear. Screaming, I turned and took the man's advice, running for my life back towards where my bike lay hidden. I barely remember getting home that night. The frantic pedaling back into town and home, along with dropping my bike into my backyard and getting back into the house after a blur. All I know is the next thing I remember was my mother shaking me awake. "Alan, honey, I need you to focus and tell me something," she said seriously. "Have you seen Harvey since school yesterday?" I didn't know what to say to her. I couldn't bring myself to say anything, so instead I simply shook my head. She looked at me for a second, then nodded, and went back downstairs, telling me it was time to get ready to go to school. As I got out of bed, I realized I'd dropped my camera when I ran. The entire rest of the day, my mind couldn't focus on anything but the memories of the previous night. My parents and teachers all noticed it, but they chalked it up to worrying about my missing friend. When Michael and Gregory approached me in the cafeteria, I said nothing. When they asked what happened, if we'd gone out there, I just felt numb. I kept replaying over and over in my head that image, the image of my friend being snacked, being swallowed whole. It's a sight that I'd see for years in my dreams, waking me up wearing a sheen of cold sweat on my skin. When I got home that day, my father was looking at me strangely and also disapprovingly. Alan, when I went out to work today, I was approached by one of the men working with the highway division, he said sternly. He said he found this lying in the sand out there. He held something out to me, but I felt my heart begin to race as he held out my camera. My camera, which had my name written on the back. He continued, "What have I told you about taking care of your valuables, young man? This camera isn't cheap, and you can't just leave it wherever when you go out to the beach, like we did last weekend." I looked up at him in surprise. He handed me the camera. "Just be lucky it was returned to you. Don't ever pull this again. You understand me?" I could do nothing but nod my head, lowering it so he couldn't see my pale face. He turned and walked away from me, and I waited until he was in the kitchen before reaching and opening up the back of the camera. Inside, it was empty. The film cartridge had been taken from it, obviously by someone who didn't want anything coming back to me. I never heard from those men again. They must have deemed me as not a threat, someone who wouldn't speak about what I saw that night, so they just left me alone, with my returned empty camera as message enough. A day or so later, I sat in the living room carpet with my father behind me on his recliner. We both watched the news reporter interviewing members of the highway division, as well as members of the public, who had been kept a quarter-mile away from the black shape rising from the sand and waves. I couldn't help but shudder at the sight of it, my eyes filling with tears for my lost friend. A few moments later, everyone pulled back, and the explosives were detonated, sending huge chunks of it into the air. The reporter ended the segment interviewing spectators again and telling viewers that the remaining chunks would be buried in the sand. I got up and walked out of the living room. They hadn't blown it up for the reason they'd said. Never blow up any whale that beached itself ashore again, not even when over 40 beached themselves at once, 9 years later. They blew it up because it was the only way to destroy that monster. They never found a trace of Harvey. His parents spent a year trying to locate him. His face ended up on posters, even in the back of milk cartons. I knew they'd never find him. Any trace of him was obliterated when the explosion went off. I'm 64 now. A few years ago, they aired a 50-year anniversary segment about the whale, whatever the whale-looking creature was, and it made me remember all the repressed memories, tried to lock away in the deepest recesses of my mind. I tried to forget again, but I can't. So I've decided, for the betterment of my mental health, as well as possibly a way to soothe the scars of my soul, to just post this here. I know nobody will believe it, but that's okay. The truth is out there now. Harvey's true fate is out there. And his parents are now long dead. Two things keep picking away at my brain, though. Even in my advanced age, I shudder to imagine if it was that dangerous beached on land, what would it be like to meet under the waves? And two, and this is perhaps what's kept me out of the ocean for all these decades. How many more of those things are out there? Hey there kids, it's me, MrCreepyPasta, and I just wanted to tell you thank you so much for watching tonight's video or for listening to tonight's episode of the podcast, wherever you happen to do that. So if it's like on YouTube, then you're probably, watching the video, but if it's on not, then you're probably listening to the podcast, with Spotify or with Apple or something like that. But yeah, thank you so much for listening. And as always, I want to give a very big thank you to everybody who supports me over at Patreon. That's patreon.com/MrCreepyPasta. I cannot thank you guys enough. Thank you guys so much for being supporters. That goes for everybody who was down in the description, as well as AcidSystem, BallarmsTheRat, Blake Rattler, Brandon Mendoza, Brenna, BrimstonePandemonium, Caltuna, ChainSmoker Dealer, ChicagoHitman, CoryxKenshin, Cronut508, CrusaderChocobo, CursepoxPrimarch, Dakota Best, Daniel Poulsen, Dante Kinkade, Diana Kraus, Ellie Hutmire, Enchanted Buns, Estebean, Gemma Halsey, Hades Nephew, Kimbo Jerry, Hour Minute Seconds Time, Jay Keens, Jettis Pet, Jordan Humble, King Crab, Mr. Marcus Blitz, Old Penguin, Peaceful Buddha, Psychomel, Red Shadowcat, Remember the Sun, Rinku Star, Salty Surprise, Samara Line, Seclude, Simba's Bloody Mojo, Sky Harbor, Smiley the Psychotic, Sullyman, Charlie Sue, the Chavez Brothers. Thank you so much. And honestly, thank you to everybody, even those guys that are in there for just $1. It really helps me out. Once again, that's patreon.com/MrCreepyPasta. Or if you guys like to just listen, honestly, it helps me out a lot too. Thank you guys so much for being here. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. And sweet dreams.